How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Yeah, I watched the movie twice. I watched the regular and the theatrical. And when I watched the director's cut and the theatrical, but when I started watching the director's cut, I put on, there's this thing on the Blu-ray called Mother Mode. Does yours have that?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And it's super weird and confusing, way more complicated than like a special feature on a Blu-ray needs to be, you know? And even when you put on, it's got like, you can bookmark things and it's really weird. But the one thing I wanted up is they have this little pop-up, like a pop-up video type thing where throughout the movie, there'll be little behind the scenes tidbits, you know? So I tried to put that on, but the way that Blu-ray has it structured, it's so big on the screen. It's not like subtitles. It's like this big thing on the screen. And I was like, I can't watch the movie this way. Like I can't see a third of what's going on. Like
You need the actual, for the kids who don't know, like you need the actual pop-up video thing, like you need the bubble sound. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just did it. Yeah. The bubble sound and the neon color or whatever it is. And it pops up and it's
Pop-up aliens.
Michael Bean actually died in this scene. Anyway, I will say this one thing, and it should be on the recording. And since we're recording, I guess it is now. This fucking book, The Futurist by Rebecca Keegan, is fantastic. I never even, no disrespect to James Cameron, who we always joke. I know you're listening, James. I never cared that much. But she writes it in such a way that it's like really interesting the entire time. It's a fantastically written book. I'm not good at words, but she is what I'm trying to say.
She is. She's a very good writer. Rebecca Keegan, that book is, I mean, we mentioned it on, I think one of either the Terminator episode or maybe one of the bonus episodes that's kind of our main source, but it is very good. It goes all the way through Avatar. I don't know if she'll do an update when the new one comes out, but it traces his whole life and career up to Avatar. Rebecca Keegan, she doesn't need us to boost her profile. She's the senior film editor at the Hollywood Reporter. So she's doing.
She did comment on your post about her though the other day.
Yeah,
so
she
that
did.
was nice.
She's very nice. Yeah, it's very nice. So yeah, that book is invaluable. It's been like my main source. I try to usually use multiple sources, magazine articles and interviews and things like that. But hers has been a good like through line, especially some like behind, because she interviews a lot of people. So you get a lot of insight that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Nice.
I mean, in the stuff talking about his childhood, she like is interviewing his brothers and like members of his family. It's very cool.
Yeah, and it's not like what you'd say. I mean, I know this episode's already going to be long enough without going on about this forever, but she deserves some praise. It's not, if you had pitched me a biography of James Cameron, I don't know that I would have cared, but it's actually just like segmented, I love the way that she breaks it up into bits, and it's an interesting story. And just the details she brings out,
and it doesn't read like a textbook. Like so many of the books that I read for this show read very boring and intellectual, and hers, it gets all the information there, but it's fun to read.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say.
It's a fun read.
But anyway, well, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock. We're the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult genre films, and we're just three simple men, not in our brains.
I'm about to say I'm offended.
Hey, you know what? I've been called worse.
I consider myself somewhat intelligent. I mean,
we're three best buddies who love movies, and we've been talking about movies our whole lives, and we decided to put it in a podcast form. We read all of this bullshit so you don't have to, and that's why we're here. And so we can tell you all about stuff like James Cameron. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horne.
I am co-host Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. This week, we'll discover the power of an S and how to make love the Ellen Ripley way in our second installment of our series titled James Cameron, The Man of Tomorrow.
Oh, thank you, Todd.
Yeah.
I don't think I kept it for Somebody Needs a Nap, but just this made me think of it, the Make Love the Ellen Ripley Way. One of the 1-star reviews I saw was a person just super pissed off because they watched the special edition of Aliens, and it apparently cut out the scene where Ellen Ripley was falling into the lava and an alien burst out of her chest. And I will have you know was never Aliens. But
yeah,
that's Alien 3.
That's the next movie.
But
so
anyway,
they're mad that a scene from a completely different movie wasn't in this movie.
Yeah, and I just love that one, but I didn't use
it.
Man,
I really hate that the director's cut of Aliens cuts out the scene where Kirk and Spock have their hands up against the glass. You remember that scene in Aliens in the theatrical cut? But the director's cut it's not there. It's 1 star.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. In the version that I watched, when you find out that Newt is Tyler Durden, it just wow. Was that in the version that you guys saw? Did you see that, or did they cut that out?
That wasn't there. It was out. It was gone.
Oh, they cut that out. 1 star. Damn it.
I missed the scene where she tried to sell soap to Hicks, but
I am Jack's face hugger.
This whole thing's already gone off the rails. Although I do have to say, you bringing up the earlier point makes me wonder if the Starship Enterprise crew, any of them, had ever run into xenomorphs. Like,
there's a comic book somewhere.
There's gotta be.
There's gotta be.
I don't feel like the Star Wars universe does not play well with this universe. Yeah, or Star Trek universe. I can't believe I did that. I'm so sorry. You're fired.
There are so many Star Trek crossover comics and Aliens crossover comics that if somebody hasn't done that, they need to get to work on it. So I do have to say before we really get going that, our last episode, our Terminator episode, thank you for everyone who listened to the whole thing. It's very long. It's the longest episode we've ever done. Might be the longest episode we ever do, because we might start putting like the bio stuff that took up the first hour or so of that episode into its own episode. Let us know what you think about that, though. If you like that, or if you like it all as one story, like we kind of joked last time, nobody really listens to these podcasts in one go unless you have a job where you can just sit and listen to it all the time. But I also think that, in the spirit of James Cameron, we made an episode that's probably longer than it needed to be.
Yeah, I was going to add, I almost feel bad, except it just means we're doing our fucking job.
Yeah, we're researching, we're finding out.
Here. Yeah.
Hey, we still edited a lot of stuff out of that from my notes and from the actual editing process, or that could have been a 4-hour episode easily.
Yeah.
There's a lot. There's no shortage of information about the creation of really any of these movies that we're going to talk about.
It's exciting. I will say this. I did find in the interviews book, apparently already in Terminator, there was a sequence that they actually shot. It was going to be Sarah Connor getting wheeled out on a gurney.
Yeah, at the end.
Yeah, when she's wheeled out, you realize that it's a factory and it's Cyberdyne, and it was going to show that them peeling off the hand and a person picking up the chip.
Just setting up part two.
Like he already had that way back in the first one. I just thought that was interesting. But
interesting.
They said they shot it, but for some reason the technical quality wasn't good enough, he said, and they decided not to use that.
I wonder if that deleted scene's available anywhere. I'd like to look that up if it is. I'm curious.
That's interesting.
So following the success of the Terminator, James Cameron was kind of thrust into the spotlight. That movie was made, we mentioned it was made for $6 million. It made a ton of money. So he was automatically kind of a star almost. So after that film, he had his choice of projects in Hollywood. But as we discussed in our Terminator episode, there was a time period during the development of that film that Cameron got a job as a screenwriter working on the sequel to Ridley Scott's Alien. And then, against the advice of pretty much everyone in Hollywood who he spoke to about it, when Cameron was ready to move on to his first post-Terminator project, it was that Alien sequel that he returned to. The resulting film is going to be, of course, the subject of this week's episode, a film that marks Cameron's first to be produced within the studio system that he would make his home for the next several decades. And the movie we're talking about is 1986's Aliens.
Just tell me one thing, Burke. You're going out there to destroy them, right? Not to study, not to bring back, but to wipe them out.
That's the plan.
All right, people, on the ready line. Movement. Talk to me, Hudson.
I got signals. I got readings in front and behind.
There's nothing back here.
Look, I'm telling you, there's something moving and it ain't us.
Get them out of there! They cut the power.
How could they cut the power, man? They're animals. There's movement all over the place. 5 meters, man. 4.
Aliens. This time, it's war.
Alien story doesn't start with James Cameron. This is a movie that was in development or in the works for a while before he sauntered into the producer's office. At the time that it came out, you got to remember that it had been 7 years since Ridley Scott's original film. That's a pretty long time between a first and second movie. So Brandywine Productions, which is the production company that had produced Scott's film, after that movie made so much money, they were pretty eager to get to work on a sequel. Now, if you recognize the name Brandywine Productions, that means that you're probably a longtime listener of this show, because we have talked about them before. But just as a refresher, Brandywine Productions was a film production company that had been founded by filmmakers Walter Hill, David Giler, and Gordon Carroll in the late 1960s. Alien was really their first big success. And honestly, if you look at their filmography, they haven't produced a ton of films, and 90% of the films that they've produced are films from the Alien franchise or related, like Alien versus Predator. Like they all have the word alien in the title or the word Prometheus in the title. So that's pretty much been their bread and butter. So why did it take 7 years for a sequel to be made? Well, there were a variety of factors at play. First, you've got 20th Century Fox president Alan Ladd Jr. He was very supportive of doing an Alien sequel, but he left the studio. He went actually to found his own studio before the project ever really went forward. And his replacement was a guy named Norman Levy. And Levy was far less supportive of doing an Alien sequel. According to David Giler, Levy thought the sequel would be a disaster. That's a direct quote from David Giler, which is an account that Levy disputes. He says that he was really only concerned about the production costs. He said he kind of hems and haws it. He wasn't necessarily opposed to it. He's just worried that it's going to cost a little too much. The studio, though, Fox, they were also worried that the success of Ridley Scott's film had kind of been a fluke and that audiences may not return for a sequel, that they were going to spend all this money and nobody would show up. Because you've also got to keep in mind, at this time, the horror bubble was starting to burst, thanks in a large part to the glut of less than stellar slasher films that had been released over the last couple of years. So grosses for the genre were starting to decline. So they were looking at it kind of from a financial standpoint. And I kind of see their point, honestly, because horror was dying at this by the mid 80s. I mean, the 80s are seen as like the golden age, sort of, but a lot of those like slasher movies came out in within a very short period of time. I mean, maybe one day we'll do a whole exploration of the slasher subgenre, but there were like hundreds of these slasher movies released within just a couple of years. So yeah, we have a lot to look back on, but the market got oversaturated. Basically.
Well, it got oversaturated. What bugs me about that is the idea that horror was dying. Like it's like, no, slashers.
It was slashers, but it was seen by the studio as a genre as a whole.
Yeah, it just bothers me that they did that. It's like, no, it's just, okay, everybody who saw Halloween and then Friday the 13th was like, oh, you just have to have a guy walking around, normal clothes and a knife or something. Then yeah that's easy money. Yeah, and then you blew it up. But things like Alien worked that.
No, but I mean, that was sort of before the slasher craze began. The slasher craze, I think, really began in full in 1980 with Friday the 13th.
I'm just saying, a xenomorph wasn't walking around in overalls and a pitchfork.
I would watch that.
I would. Yeah. I would too, to be fair.
College humor has to have done something like that, right?
College humor. Do they still exist? Or are them and Funny or Die hanging out in the side room somewhere?
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's awesome. I forgot all about that.
So development on Aliens was further delayed when Giler, Hill, and Carroll sued Fox for unpaid profits from Alien. By utilizing some what we'll call creative accounting methods, Fox had declared that Alien was a financial loss, that there were no profits, despite the fact that the film made over $100 million on a $10 million budget. Hollywood, you can actually look up like Hollywood accounting online. Like I literally think there's a Wikipedia page that says Hollywood accounting that's all about this phenomenon of studios kind of cooking the books essentially in a way that makes it seem like movies don't make that haven't made any money so that they can do things like this and not pay people the way that they're supposed to be paid.
I mean, Corman was a prime example in our Little Shop of Horrors episode. I mean, he was literally planning a whole film around the fact that he had to get it done before he needed to pay actors more.
Right. Yep. So this lawsuit, the Alien lawsuit, ended up being settled by early 1983. But by that time, they'd already shaved years off the development time for a potential sequel. I mean, this is already 4 years from the original film's release. And by the end of it, Fox had agreed to finance the development of Alien 2, but they wouldn't be required to distribute it if they didn't want to. So by this time in the timeline, there's already another new studio head at Fox. There's a rotating door in the top offices at Fox for a few years here. This guy's name is Joe Wiseman. Joe Wiseman was receptive to the idea of an Alien sequel, but he couldn't quite convince everyone at the studio. Like, I mean, obviously what he says goes, but not everyone was gung-ho about going forward with this. They had some reservations. So with the lawsuit out of the way and with a studio head that was at least open to the idea of Alien 2, work on the sequel could officially begin. So Giler asked his development executive, Larry Wilson, to start looking for someone to write a script for their Alien sequel. And it was during this search process that he came across a little sci-fi film that was in the early stages of development. That script was, of course, The Terminator. So as we discussed on our last episode, on that Terminator episode, there was about a 9-month period during the pre-production phase of The Terminator when James Cameron lost his film star because Arnold Schwarzenegger became contractually required to shoot the sequel to Conan the Barbarian. Remember, Dino De Laurentiis essentially whisked him away to work on his project. But during that 9 months, he started shopping the Terminator script around as kind of an example of his writing talent, which is how it ended up on Larry Wilson's desk.
Yeah, he came in and swept me off my feet, and which is impressive. I'm very large.
That still doesn't sound like Arnold.
No, that was terrible.
It sounds like
listen, fellas, I'll take care of this. Todd, you suck.
What was the character on Animaniacs who had like the big muscle? That's what it sounds more like.
Anyway, everybody.
That's another Animaniacs joke. So good callback. So anyway, Larry Wilson reads the script. He enjoys it. He thinks it's really good. So he passes it along to his bosses at Brandywine, and they agreed to meet with Cameron about writing this Alien sequel. So when Cameron took the meeting, he didn't really know who Giler and Hill were. Or rather, he knew who they were. Like he knew Walter Hill's name. Walter Hill's a pretty famous director by this time, but he didn't know that they had produced the first Alien film. What he did know is that he loved the original Alien film. This wasn't just like a writing for money gig, although it was partially that. But Alien was a film that he considered the greatest sci-fi horror film ever made, calling it, quote, a high watermark in the genre. He had seen the film during its original theatrical release, and he rewatched it obsessively while he was working on Galaxy of Terror for Roger Corman, which, of course, is kind of Roger Corman's Alien ripoff anyway, so it makes sense.
Yeah, he'd gone and seen it with his buddy Randall Frakes on opening night. He said, you might remember that name from last episode. This is the buddy you worked on Xenogenesis with.
Jonathan Frakes' brother, I think.
Yeah, probably. He worked with him on the Corman stuff in the effects department, even after, I think. He talks about how they used to love watching stuff together, and they'd make fun of stuff throughout the film. And he had vivid memories of Alien that they went and they were just like sucked in immediately. Like they couldn't make fun of anything. They were just like drawn into the movie. The reason he was seeing Giler and Hill was they were trying to remake Spartacus, and they had they wanted to do it sci-fi style. And so they thought Cameron was the guy to do it based on Terminator. And so that's what the pitch meeting was for. And Cameron was pumped about that and came in with all these ideas on how to do it. And it turned out Giler and Hill weren't feeling the huge sci-fi epic idea exactly. They still wanted the sword and sandals thing just on another planet. That'd be the sci-fi part of this whole thing. So it wasn't really going to work.
John Carter of Mars.
Right. But just as Cameron, like you said, was walking out, they were like, well, wait a second. There is this one idea we've been working on.
So needless to say, as a big fan of the original Alien, he's pretty excited about the idea of working on a sequel to that film. But he did kind of try to play it cool with these guys. He didn't want to seem like he was giddy about the idea of working on an Alien sequel. So he heard Giler and Hill's pitch, which basically amounted to Ripley and some soldiers. Let's do that. Let's throw some Marines in there. And he offered to write them a treatment on this.
And so credit to Geiler and Hill, according to Cameron, they'd really gone hard on their plans thus far. Like, it was literally a half page that said, essentially, there's a colony, everybody gets killed, so they send in the Marines.
Yeah.
And he said specifically the notes ended with, and then some bullshit happens. So he had some gaps to fill in.
He had to fill in the bullshit. Basically.
Screenwriting 101.
That's producing 101.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So Cameron returned with a 42-page treatment in November of 1983, one that he had written in just 3 days. This is like a week after their meeting. So he returns a week later. And that treatment was based on a script that Cameron had actually previously written about a year and a half earlier called Mother. The story for Mother, which had originally actually been called E.T. until Cameron found out that this guy, Steven Spielberg, was working on something under that name. It took place on Venus, and its creature, its like main, monster was this human alien hybrid that had been genetically engineered to live in an environment that was fatal to humans. Now, that's a detail that obviously we've watched Aliens. We know that gets left out of the sequel, but Cameron does revive that a few decades later in Avatar. But a lot of this script ended up in his Alien 2 treatment. The story ended with a battle between the titular mother alien and the film's lead, who at that time was a male, who was wearing an exoskeletal loader called a power suit. So he has a lot of this already ready to go. And he just ends up modifying a little bit, adding a bunch of Marines, changing the lead character to Sigourney Weaver's character Ripley, and voila, you've got Alien 2. When Cameron returned to Geiler and Hill just a week after their initial meeting with basically the entire movie planned out, they were pretty impressed. They liked his idea. They liked his treatment. They hired him on the spot to write the full script. So it was at this time that Cameron was also hired to write Rambo 2. So he's working on 3 scripts at once. We've mentioned this in our Terminator episode. But before he can finish the Alien script, he's got to return to shoot the Terminator. Basically, he gets word he's working on Aliens. He gets about 2/3 of the way through it, about 90 pages. And all of a sudden, Arnold's ready to go. He's back from shooting Conan, and they can get back to the Terminator. So he had to kind of pause writing the script. Luckily, the executives at 20th Century Fox were impressed enough with the first 90 pages of the script that they actually offered to wait until Cameron was done with the Terminator so that he could finish writing it, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, let's focus on this for a second, because this is kind of cool of them. Cameron was happy he had Aliens, but Geiler was the one who told him, like, when he came in, it was like, this is, I got Rambo 2 also. I don't know what to do now. And Geiler told him, don't be stupid, take both jobs. And so he did. And it was because, I guess, they felt like, according to Cameron, he said that maybe with the Terminator script, they felt like they had hit the jackpot or whatever reason. But with the timing of that, though, like you said, he had 3 months on all of these. This was like late 1984. Terminator was supposed to shoot next February. Rambo 2 was pretty immediate. So 3 scripts, 3 months. And I don't want to miss this, because this is the kind of dude we're working with here. And I fucking suck at time management. So this part just blew my mind. James Cameron operates on a different level than everybody else, especially me. His brain and the Terminators are fairly similar. And and I mean the actual Terminator, not Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't think Cameron comes when he does a bench press or whatever. Probably.
No, he comes when he shoots a gun.
But what he did manage in this workflow is he analyzed everything and decided each script would be 2 hours long. So 120 pages on the total page count of 360. He then divided the total number of waking hours that he had during the 3-month period, minus the time in the early hours that would be used for pre-production meetings on Terminator, divided that by the 360 and determined the number of pages per hour that he had to write. And he did that longhand on yellow legal pads. Each
nerd alert.
Yeah. Each segment of his writing was marked with its own soundtrack too, like Gustav Holst's The Planets for Alien 2. he recommends Mars, Bringer of War as a track from that one that people should enjoy.
All right.
Apocalypse Now soundtrack for Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Makes sense. Vietnam, yeah.
He didn't say specifically, but I'm presuming the clanging of metal things together for the Terminator.
It was Stomp, the hit Broadway show.
And he got lucky here too. Being as prepared as they say, like luck is preparation meets opportunity or whatever. He got lucky here too, because what happened was, despite all of that shit, he still didn't get everything done because, I mean, like you were talking about, Rambo 2 was quite the job. Just for people who are wondering, Cameron was going all in on it with his normal passion, but where he wanted this like thoughtful, meticulous story,
like the first film.
Yeah. He was dealing with a more established action badass than Sylvester Stallone, who definitely had pull and kept changing stuff up.
I don't know if you know this about Stallone, but he's got a bit of an ego.
Yeah. He was requesting revision after revision. By the time Cameron was done, he said, quote, it was as though we had them parachuting into Nam for a 6-pack of beer. Now don't get me wrong.
To be fair, Rambo 2 is awesome.
I was going to say, don't get me wrong. Rambo is another story. And I love the Rambo movies, and just to throw it out there, it ain't really Cameron's sophisticated action film vision, if anybody was wondering about that, but it's still a fun movie.
Let's clarify further. Have any of you tried Vietnamese beer?
No, I did.
It might be worth parachuting in for, fellas.
That's true.
Just consider.
That's true.
But my point about him being lucky was just because by the time all this happened, his schedule was fucked. He was like 4 drafts into Rambo 2. He'd only got 2 acts into the Alien movie. It's time to start filming Terminator. And luckily, Fox decided to wait. They said it was like Geiler and Hill had to go to Lawrence Gordon, who was the president of 20th Century Fox, who
yet another one.
Yeah. Who
this is number 4 in our story so far.
But yeah, he basically thought that Cameron had the talent to do it, and he loved what he had written so far, saying that, quote, in this business there are those decisions you agonize and lose sleep over, but this one was so obvious, it's a no-brainer. Everything about this guy spelled right, guy. And so,
and we know this about Cameron, and we'll continue to learn it, but he's a hell of a salesman. Like, he sells himself and he sells his projects with a lot of enthusiasm. And I think, and that seems to be catching when he's in the room with other guys, with other studio executives, producers, etc. He's able to convince people because he is genuinely enthusiastic about it,
Right.
And, the guys at Fox, they were so impressed with his script that they actually told him that if the Terminator turned out well, if this movie turns out good and makes some money and is a good movie, a well-made movie, then, that kind of shows that Cameron's as good of a director as he is a writer. Then they'll also let him direct the sequel to Alien. Well, as we know, the Terminator turned out pretty well. We talked about it for 3.5 hours last week. So the Terminator turned out pretty well.
Significant part of movie history.
Yeah. So the guy then the guys at Brandywine, the guys at Fox, they were ready to keep up their end of that agreement. But then all of a sudden, after Terminator came out, Cameron had become a hot ticket in Hollywood, and he didn't need the Alien 2 gig. He didn't need this job as like his next project. He had his choice of projects.
But he's a dedicated guy, like we talk about. Michael Bean told a story about walking into Cameron's office literally the same morning of finishing, like, wrapping Terminator, and Cameron was in his office, like, shoving cheese crackers in his mouth and, like, writing on the pad. And he's like, I got a treatment for aliens. I got to get there by 12:30. He was like, this guy has a different kind of energy.
Yeah. Julia Phillips, who was a producer, she was the producer behind Taxi Driver and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. She warned Cameron that if he directed Alien 2, anything good about the movie would be attributed to Ridley Scott's vision, and anything bad would be attributed to Cameron's. He was warned, and not just by her, but by multiple people, he was warned that this could be career suicide. All that goodwill that he had gained from the Terminator could just go up in smoke unless he just absolutely knocked this thing out of the park. But he persisted because, as he later said, it'll be cool. Like, he thought, he was a big, like I said, he was a big fan of Alien. So he just thought it would be cool to work on the next one.
Yeah. I mean, I'd take passion over,
talent.
Yeah. Well, over a lot of things, honestly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know about over talent. There's a lot of very untalented, very passionate people out there.
Yeah.
So while he was,
you, Todd.
That's fair. That's fair.
So
I'm known for being so dispassionate.
So while he was working on his screenplay, he began calling the film Aliens with an S, plural, Aliens. He pitched the title to Giler and Hill in a very James Cameron-like way. He held up a piece of paper. He had written the word alien on it in big, Sharpie, big black magic marker. Then he added an S to it. And then he turned that S into a $sign. And they loved it. And they agreed on the new title immediately. He sold them just for that stupid thing.
I told you this fucking guy's a genius. Didn't I tell you that?
Look at that. He turned the S into a $sign.
It's the sequel, and there's more than one. Get it? It's fucking brilliant.
I don't know why we turned Giler and Hill into like background characters from The Sopranos.
Just so many. I don't know. I think it
I
goes back to Texas Chainsaw
expecting...
being made by the mob.
Yeah.
Well, they took that idea, and that's how they made the Schitt's Creek logo as well. A lot of people don't know that.
Oh yeah, from Aliens.
Yeah,
it broke Hill's heart that they didn't actually use a $sign.
So there was still some trepidation at the studio at Fox, not at Brandywine. They were gung-ho, but at Fox, there was still a little bit of trepidation about it. Because at this time in the early 80s, I mean, things were very different than they are now. It was not a foregone conclusion that a sequel to a hit film would be profitable. There weren't a ton of sequels at the time. There were some, and obviously it had very recently worked for Star Wars, but it still wasn't like a regular occurrence like it is now. But they had faith that their concept of a war film set in space had the potential to be a big hit. And for Cameron, the idea of making a war film was creatively very exciting for him. It's probably, honestly, part of this is probably what attracted him to Rambo 2 as well. He saw Aliens as something like The Dirty Dozen, like a film where you've got this scruffy, diverse group of soldiers, an ensemble, and they find themselves trapped behind enemy lines and behind enemy lines where the enemies are more equipped to fight than they are. And there were other advantages to making an Aliens war film. Cameron, first of all, there's going to be comparison between this and Ridley Scott's movie, right? There's no way to get around that when you're making a sequel. And he knew that he wouldn't be able to create this atmosphere of dread that was any better than what Scott had already done. He wasn't even going to try to do what Ridley Scott did. So he wanted to take it in a different direction, one that would allow him to graft his own style onto the film. He basically wanted to take the alien premise and turn it into a James Cameron movie, right? He didn't want to make a Ridley Scott movie. But Cameron was also a child of the 60s, right? He grew up during the Vietnam era. So even though he had been too young to go to war, it was a regular occurrence in his life as a kid where, he saw coverage of the war on the news every day. It was everywhere. It was all over the place. And he had also immersed himself in the war while he was researching for Rambo 2. He'd read a lot of books. He watched Apocalypse Now a lot, like Gary mentioned. And he ended up using kind of the attitude and lingo of U.S. troops in Vietnam, these like cocky soldiers, for his colonial Marines. He would later say, quote, "It was a definite parallel to Vietnam to tell the story of a technologically superior military force, which is defeated by a determined, furtive, asymmetric enemy."
The pride before the fall. He'd say these guys are trained, they're armed to the gills, they're ready for anything, and then they're going to get fucked up by bugs. Basically, is and it just they're so sure of themselves and what they're capable of that they're not prepared actually for what they're going to deal with this enemy is going to bring. It's not going to be until I feel like Avatar that he gets really into like really showing like humanity more so like in the violence part of it. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll find out. I don't know. That's the first one that comes to mind. But he talks about dealing with cyborgs or he calls them huge, hungry, praying mantises. He says you don't, in his words, flounder in morality. either. You're not killing human beings. You don't have to ask yourself, anything questions about this. So that makes it a little easier to like do the violence that's going to happen, and that sort of thing. But you mentioned something else I wanted to bring up too, is like that for him, Aliens had to be completely different than Alien, whilst still being an extension of the first film. But he in some interviews refers to it as a prequel. Of like that movie is a prequel. Like he's like, that's the prequel to my movie. He's like, the writer Dan O'Bannon, the director Ridley Scott established a set of elements which can't be violated, but they only created part of the universe which primarily dealt with life and death within the confines of a spaceship. So he gets to flesh out the world. And so he says, he said they literally existed in a vacuum. There was no past or life beyond that film. And Ripley, who's the only survivor, because she's a very strong female, he said that impressed him very much. And he wanted to take that character further to know Ripley as a person and get into the depth and emotion that Ripley had. So the movie for him was about her because she's the one connecting tissue. You can get inside her mind. She's going back to face her worst nightmare and to conquer it. That sort of thing. It's about her revenge. I'm sure we'll talk more about that stuff. But to him, it was basically like Ripley is the thing that connects the two things. Otherwise, it's like there is an established like aliens exist. We know that, but there's no other stuff that necessarily like, really story-wise connected it. He just treats himself like he's doing this whole other thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, because Ripley's the only thing left over from the original film. And she's the lone survivor of the Nostromo. So she's the only connecting element. So, and while he was writing the screenplay, he was very well aware that he needed to use Ripley as like that connecting force. So his screenplay ended up featuring Ripley in pretty much every scene. I mean, when he was writing the screenplay, he kept a photo of Sigourney Weaver at his desk to kind of keep him on track. The problem with that was that Weaver had no idea that a sequel was being worked on. She was not under contract to make a sequel, and she had really no interest in ever revisiting the world of Alien. So Cameron finds out this information, comes as kind of a shock to him, because you'd think that maybe his producers or Fox or somebody might have mentioned this. But Cameron, being James Cameron, he took matters into his own hands. He called Weaver, who's in France, working on a movie at the time. He called her and he said, "Look, you don't know me from Adam, but I just wrote this script I'm calling Aliens. And now I'm in an embarrassing situation. I've been working on this film for some time, but now I'm being told that you don't know anything about it." So he asked her if he can send her a script. And Weaver, she was a little hesitant, but she agreed to read the script. And when she did, she was pleasantly surprised by Cameron's treatment of the Ripley character, because he really does give her a lot more to chew on than the original film did.
To hear him talk about it, it's like you're talking about the Vietnam style thing. I mean, these old style movies that he's thinking of basing this movie on, Sigourney Weaver is his John Wayne. Yeah. And so now he finds out like, so the star of the whole fucking thing is not involved. That's
right.
Pretty fucked.
Yeah. And in the original movie, we don't learn a lot about Ripley as a character. There's not a lot of backstory. There's not a lot of life beyond the film. But Cameron gave her a backstory. He's the one that gave her the first name of Ellen. He reveals that she had a daughter back on Earth who aged and died while Ripley was in hypersleep. This is a scene that was cut out of the version of the film that was released theatrically, although it was, of course, restored in the director's cut. But the character's maternal instinct still becomes a big part of the story when she takes the little girl Newt under her wing. So he's definitely playing with this. And in Scott's film, Ripley wasn't written as a woman. Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett, they originally wrote it as a man, but there was nothing really specific about the gender. So casting Sigourney Weaver in that role really added a whole nother element to the film. But here, Cameron's treatment of the character makes her even more complex because she is portrayed as both a mother and a warrior. And we've mentioned Rebecca Keegan's book, The Futurist, that the James Cameron biography that me and Gary have been reading. And in that, she has a great quote in that. She says, Cameron managed to treat her gender as both the heart of her character and a complete non-issue. And I absolutely love that because she nails it. I mean, that's exactly what he's doing. It doesn't, like, her being a woman doesn't really seem to matter to any of the people around her. Doesn't matter to the Marines. And so many of these movies, the Marines are, would be bother that there's this woman tagging along who's not even a Marine, and but it's not an issue here at all. But the fact that she is a woman adds a lot of gravitas to her story, especially once Newt comes into play. So Weaver,
I have a dog named Ripley, by the way.
Is it named after this?
It is. I named her specifically after Sigourney Weaver's character in the Alien films.
Thank you. What's your other dog's name?
Willow.
I mean, I already knew that, but our
she's named after Willow from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Not from the movie with Warwick Davis.
No, although I could go with that since there's a series coming.
Yeah, looks pretty good.
Yeah,
I don't even care about Willow.
You never liked the movie. I actually am a big fan of the movie, but just because of Val Kilmer, I think as Mad Mardigan is fantastic. Yeah. But that's a whole other movie. It's not for now.
We're not talking about that. So Sigourney Weaver agreed to meet with Cameron, but she had a few notes for him. She wanted Ripley to die in the film. She didn't want the character to use guns. And she wanted Ripley to make love to the alien. Cameron wisely vetoed all of these. Although all of those things happen.
I was about to say her power will grow after this one, though. So look out.
Yeah. All of those things happen between the subsequent and the subsequent movies. But at the time, Cameron's like, no, we're not doing that. But their creative tug of war kind of forced him to think about the character differently and showed him how much that she really cared and had invested in this character.
Yeah, I think he learned to work with actors and such a lot more in this one. So that's nice. She said that he came to her and told her, if you think of the first one as a fun house, this one is the roller coaster.
Nice.
That's how he put it.
That's good. And of course, at this point, Weaver still has not signed on to make the movie. She does not have a contract. And the year since Alien, she had become a star. She had become fairly famous. She'd appeared in movies like The Year of Living Dangerously, of course, Ghostbusters, we all know. And since there was an entire script written around her, she thought that she had some pretty good negotiating power for a fat paycheck. But the studio did not quite see it that way, and they were kind of holding out on her. And then in April of 1985, contract negotiations stalled only a few months before the movie was set to start shooting. They still don't have their star signed on. And at this point, Cameron had already had to fight to get Gail Ann Hurd hired by the studio as a producer in the film, because they didn't really see her as a real producer, either due to her youth. She was only 29 years old at the time, or because of her romantic relationship to Cameron. They thought, it was a producer and credit only kind of thing, so they didn't really want to hire her, but Cameron eventually convinced them. And it wasn't long after this when Cameron and Hurd got married. And then just before the couple left to go get married, they went to Maui for a destination wedding. And just before they got on the plane to go, Cameron told Fox that they had until he returned to finalize Weaver's deal, or he was out and Hurd was out. They were done. Like, you got to get Sigourney Weaver or we're not doing this movie. But then when they returned, Weaver still didn't have a contract, which put Cameron in kind of a sticky spot because it's like, okay, do I stick to my word and walk away, or do I just kind of go with it and see what we can do? But he had a plan in mind. So here's what he does. I love this story, by the way. Cameron calls Arnold Schwarzenegger's agent at ICM being the talent agency, which also happened to be the talent agency where Weaver was represented. So he told Arnold's agent that he's like, I've decided I'm going to drop the Ripley character. We don't need it. Let's get rid of it. We're going to build this story around Newt and the Marines, and that way Aliens would be 100% James Cameron's film. It's going to be my movie with no baggage left over from Scott's original, so people aren't going to be like comparing it. And that's how the phone call goes. He hangs up the phone, declaring just before he hangs up that, all right, I'm going to go start on the script now. Let's go. Hangs up the phone. Of course, Cameron had no intention of writing Ripley out of the script. But after he hung up the phone, Schwarzenegger's agent called Weaver's agent, because remember, they're co-workers. Weaver's agent calls Fox. By the end of the day, Weaver had been hired. Her contract had been signed, and she ended up getting paid $1 million, which was about 30 times more than she had been paid for the original film.
Oh, wow.
He argues, he says that he thinks that she might have gotten the biggest payday for a female leading actress ever. Well, I looked this up, by the way, though, and probably that goes to Elizabeth Taylor. when she played
Cleopatra.
Yeah. She got like $1 million and then also got like 10% of profit or something.
That movie didn't make any money. But that movie was one of the most famous bombs in movie history. But $1 million in 1960s money is what she made.
Yeah.
And versus 1980s money.
Oh, I think they said like literally the article I was reading said that probably ended up like technically she would be making like $7 million or something by the time the deal was done in modern terms. So, but anyway, but James Cameron says she was not Elizabeth Taylor, but Sigourney Weaver, worth every penny, and they should have just ponied that up in the first place.
They should have. Many of the film's other roles were filled by faces that were already familiar for Cameron. He cast Michael Biehn as Hicks, the Marine squad leader. Bill Paxton, who, his old buddy who had helped build sets on back in the Roger Corman days, who had a small role at the beginning of the Terminator. He plays a Marine named Hudson, who's kind of the movie's comic relief, I guess you'd say. And of course, Cameron's old buddy Lance Henriksen's there, who he'd met in the like 4 or 5 days that he was directing Piranha 2.
Henriksen actually had to audition though. Like
did he?
Yeah, because he said that there was like a edict that they like had to have like they could only have so many American people.
Yeah, because they're working in England, so they have to have a certain percentage of English actors.
So like Henriksen actually had to audition against several other people. They were trying to really pitch the android part, I guess, because of the prior movie, maybe. But they said that they were really trying to pitch that as a British actor.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, Ian Holm's British, and does Fassbender talk in his accent in the Prometheus movies? I can't remember.
It's pretty Midwest.
Is it?
Okay.
Henriksen gets the role. He plays an android named Bishop, and I was watching this last night, and I was going, man, why would they design an android to look like Lance Henriksen? Like, why, when you're manufacturing an android, why would you make it look like? I get why you make it look like Michael Fassbender, right? Lance Henriksen's got an enormous forehead.
It's true.
Terrifying eyes. These canyons in his face, and male pattern baldness. But then again, why would you design an android to look like Ian Holm? Like, oh, let's make an android. He's gonna look like a person, but a foot and a half shorter than a normal guy.
He's gonna be like a foot. He's gonna be like a short Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, he's gonna be just
oh my god, yeah,
short gray hair, a little bit of a tummy.
Yep, that's it.
Well, you know what's even more fucked up though too is, well, maybe not more fucked up, but I did not realize this until I was researching this time. They had James Remar cast for Hicks.
Yeah, originally he was Michael Biehn was not cast in the role. It was James Remar, who I guess most people, he's in everything, but Dexter's dad is probably his most famous role.
That's always my go-to.
Yeah,
but he's in so many fucking things, and always a guy that I think like, oh, that guy looks like Lance Henriksen. So I love the idea that they could have been in a movie together, like side by side, and you'd have been like, this is weird. They both have like Smoker's voice and that male pattern baldness, slick back hair, and
well, James Remar, he worked on the film for a couple of weeks.
He was the body double for Hicks.
What? No, he wasn't.
I saw he was the body double.
Well, no, he was hired.
I think
to
what
be
you're
Hicks.
thinking of is
I'm not reading the books, fellas.
No, I was gonna say I think what you might be thinking of is like, I mean, he definitely says there's scenes where it is him.
Yeah, he worked on the film for a couple of weeks before he got fired. He got fired because he was caught with illegal drugs in his possession, which seems like a really weird reason for an actor to get fired. Because, but I don't know, maybe I don't know the story. That's a story that he told on a podcast a couple years ago.
Because when they officially released it, they said it was just like mutual differences or whatever.
Yeah,
but he admitted it was drugs.
Yeah, it was drugs. And so Biehn was a last minute replacement. He was only hired a few days before like his scenes were to be shot.
He complained he didn't get to, everybody got custom armor when they were making it, but Biehn didn't get that. He said that the heart with the locket on his chest looked like too much of a bullseye. He would have never chosen that. But
shut up.
I swear to God, that's what he said.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah.
But he also, I talked about him last episode. It's just like, he seems like such a nice guy, but he still stands by that. Cameron's the only person he says that ever really cast him as such heroic characters. He said like Hicks and Reese. He said everybody else
does play a lot of bad guys.
Yeah, he says everybody else must look at him and see something wicked in his eyes, or think for some reason people meet him and think something's wrong with him. Anyway, I guess Cameron comes around. We'll talk about that in the next movie, I guess. But
so Jeanette Goldstein, who was a bodybuilder actually with no previous acting experience at all before this, and she would later appear in both Terminator 2 and Titanic. She plays Vasquez in what I can only describe as brown face.
I was gonna say, like, I saw this, like, people are complaining about it.
I'll say this in Titanic, she plays an Irish immigrant. So
well, there you go.
And for Newt, the little girl, Cameron found a 9-year-old girl, another one with no acting experience named Carrie Hinn. He had a bunch of kids that auditioned for this, and he didn't like any of them. All these kids that had like previous acting experience, he said they would always like smile after they'd say a line. He's like, that's fine for like a Pepsi commercial, but not when you're not when you're like hiding from you just saw your entire family obliterated and you're running for your life hiding from killer aliens.
Kid, are you trying to sell me a soft drink, or did your fucking family get murdered right in front of your face?
And once again, Todd, I know that at least one of these actors that I've mentioned, without even researching it, has appeared in a Star Trek movie. I actually know a couple of them. But I want to see what you've dug up.
Well, folks, for this week's installment of Whom I Trekking With, we've got 3 actually from the entire show, Aliens. It's basically they're all Marines. Up first, we got Daniel Cash as Private Spunkmeyer. He's done 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery.
Gary's laughing at the word.
Was that your nickname in high school?
Spunkmeyer. Listen, I let the full Brazilian comment go. I didn't make a joke about full Brazilian at all, because I was like, oh, so many, I can't get them all out. All right, but
we're still problematic no matter what we do.
That's right, not to be. But but we can keep letting Todd and Gary on the show.
Hold on. I'm also known as something of a Spunkmeyer. How about that? There we go.
I was saying that for Dick Bush.
Oh, we're getting there.
Anyways, so
Daniel Cash. Okay.
Yeah, he's done. He did a couple episodes of Star Trek Discovery. Mark Rolston as Drake. He started off on Star Trek Next Generation, season 7, episode 18, Eye of the Beholder. Then he did a couple episodes of Star Trek Enterprise, season 2, episode 17, Canamar.
So that's one you've covered then.
Yeah, absolutely. And then coming up in the final season of Enterprise, season 4, episode 16, The Augments, which was directed by LeVar Burton. And then
I don't know who that is.
Yeah, you don't know.
I don't know who that is.
He reads kids' books. It's not a big deal. Anyway,
is he can't? Is he not able to read adult books?
Well, there's a question about how well he can see and all that. So yeah, anyway, but Mark Ralston also was in an episode of the fan-made Star Trek Continues, season 1, episode 9, What Ships Are For. If anybody out there is at all curious about some of the fan-made Star Trek stuff, a lot of it is not great.
What? No.
But I know. Hard to believe a fan-made product isn't really up to snuff. But actually, Star Trek Continues is really, really fantastic, and it's all on YouTube. Okay. It kind of acts like season 4 of the original series. It's very, very good. And then we've got Jeanette Goldstein as Private Vasquez. She was in Star Trek Generations as a science officer.
I don't even think her character has a name.
No, she's just credited as science officer. She was also in the video game Star Trek Invasion in 2000 as Typhon Engineer. And then she's also been on 2 episodes of Star Trek Short Treks as the USS Enterprise computer. So
what is Short Trek? Is that a Paramount Plus thing?
Basically between some of the seasons of Discovery, they came out with this thing called Short Treks, and it's a bunch of short films. Like
they're
15,
not
like
animated,
15.
like they're live action.
Some of them are. Some of them are.
It's a mix. Okay,
but
she does the computer's voice.
She's the voice of the USS
That's pretty
Enterprise.
cool. That's cool.
It's actually pretty cool.
That's cool. I knew she was in Generations. That's the one. And I knew that Mark Rolston had done some Star Trek stuff.
Oh yeah, and that's everybody in Star Trek.
I love. Did you watch the commentary where they got to like they were coming out of their little sleeping chambers, and everybody when Rico Ross, who plays Private Frost, got out and he's like all ripped up. They were like, "Oh, there's Rico. Fuck that guy." They were like, Bill Paxton's like, "Yeah, man, I gave up like a week into that. I like beer too much."
I gotta say, like, this might be getting a little bit of ahead because we kind of saved this stuff for the end, but like, I really dug Hudson this time. Hudson's always been kind of annoying to me, but something about it this time.
He's supposed to be a little annoying, but
he says it in the commentary. He talks about like he's like, hey, people are supposed to be ready for me to die when it's time to die. But
well, I think he kind of redeems himself towards the end, though. Like he becomes someone you care about. But yeah, I mean, Bill Paxton's one of those characters. I think about this. I love Bill Paxton. I think he's just there's something really charming about him. But for some reason, I've never thought he was like a great actor. Like, I feel like there's something about Bill Paxton's performance and everything that he does where I can feel him acting. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? And I don't know what it is, but I still love him regardless. And I like watching him on screen because he's got a screen presence, but his performances are always a little like actory. I don't know how to explain it other than it doesn't feel real. It feels like a guy playing a role.
Even during the speech in Independence Day.
That's
Bill Pullman.
That's the other guy.
I'm just kidding.
This is where you insert the sound clip of the two of them from SNL. I'm Bill Paxton. I'm Bill Pullman, and I'm Bill Paxton.
So the cast here, though, I think it's one of the biggest strengths of this film. I mean, there's a lot of love given to Sigourney Weaver, very well deserved. But I think that this ensemble is really what makes or rather is a big part of what makes this movie so good, because this is a war movie, right? And the best war movies are only as good as their assembled characters. A great war movie is only as good as the soldiers that are in it. And think of something like, James Cameron wanted to make something like The Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen's that way. Every character is great. Or for a more recent example, Inglourious Bastards. Like every character. Yeah, Brad Pitt's the star he's the lieutenant in charge, but every character under him gets great little moments, great war movies, I think, are more about the soldiers than they are about the fight. And I think that fair. Aliens really gets these soldiers right. At least the main ones, the ones that don't die immediately. Each character kind of gets their own little moment. Even the ones in like smaller roles, they get their own little moments. My favorite of which is honestly one of my favorite lines in the whole movie, which is when Hudson asks Vasquez, "Have you ever been mistaken for a man?" To which she replies, "No, have you?" And I laugh at that line every time I watch this. You immediately get this great little antagonism between them, then her and Mark Rolston's character. They've got this great like buddy thing going on. They're like bros. They're both the ones with the big giant gun that they carry around their waist. Yeah. Which, by the way, that was just a
Steadicam.
It was a Steadicam rig.
I was thinking that looked like a Steadicam rig.
It was a Steadicam rig, but at the time, Cameron was like, and this was probably true in 1986, that the general public didn't know what a Steadicam rig looked like.
Yeah,
so they're like, nobody will know that that's what it is, but of course now people do.
I think Vasquez is the reason why I like to get hit during sex.
Yeah, I get it. She probably doesn't like men, honestly. That's just I'm just guessing. But I think Jeanette Goldstein is great in this. I think Mark Rolston is great in it, even though he doesn't last that long, but like in the small amount of time he's on screen, I think he's really good. He was very inexperienced at the time. He had done a little bit of TV before this, but this was his first movie. But he's gone on, of course, to become like a great character actor. He often plays cops or soldiers. He's in, Saw. He's in all kinds of stuff, or one of the Saw movies. I can't remember which one. But one of the great indicators, I think, of just how great the chemistry was between the actors who played, the Marines is that other people kept casting them in movies together. Like after this, I mean, Cameron, of course, uses several of them in later films, but then not long after this, director Catherine Bigelow, she cast Paxton, Hendrickson, and Goldstein in Near Dark, which is her amazing vampire movie that she directed.
Right.
Goldstein and Rolston appeared together in Lethal Weapon 2. And of course, Paxton and Bean, of course, appeared together in Tombstone. Nice. So like people kept seeing like them work. It's almost like people saw them working together and like these guys work great together. There's a lot of chemistry on screen, and just kept grabbing a couple of them for roles here and there.
Yeah. Goldstein's in Terminator 2. We're going to talk about that eventually.
She's John's foster mother.
And so is Bill Paxton. No, he's not. But you know what would be funny is if Bill Paxton was in every Terminator movie as a person who gets killed immediately in the first 5 minutes.
He's the red shirt of Terminator movies.
Yes.
So once his cast was assembled, all of the actors playing Marines had to participate in a 2-week boot camp, not for training purposes necessarily, although that was part of it, but really it was to get them to bond so that they would appear authentic as a team on screen. Now, the exceptions were Sigourney Weaver didn't come because they wanted her to kind of seem like an outsider. Same with Bishop. Lance Henriksen wasn't there for the very same reason. And Michael Biehn wasn't there because had not been hired yet. So he didn't get to really bond with the rest of them.
But even in the commentary, like when you watch that, they seem like they legitimately do all love each other. Like they seem like they really like each other, even when they're sitting down together. They're just like, oh, it's good to see you. Like every 20 years we'll get to hang out. It's but they seem like buddies, and it's nice to hear stories about Sigourney, by the way, too, because like she seems great, but like I even Bill Pullman telling stories about her is like she's so nice. Like I thought I was fucking up so bad or something because she was just like really sweet to me. Like almost like Sigourney Weaver thought he was simple.
They thought he was simple. Oh man,
he's like, funny. But no, she's just that nice.
So while he had planned on including, the chest burster, the face huggers, and other design elements from the first film, James Cameron also wanted to put his own stamp on the film's monsters. And the script's alien queen really gave him the chance to show out. So Cameron, he came up with this idea. He painted the concept himself, creating a sort of cross between a Black Widow spider and a dinosaur. This creature that he created, that he was envisioning, was huge. It was going to be 14 feet tall, dragging this distended egg sack full of little baby aliens or eggs. So the question, though, was how was he going to pull this off practically on set? Remember, this is pre-CGI. For this job, he recruited his old pal, Stan Winston. So he explained this concept to Winston and kind of how they thought they could pull it off. He said, we'll get a couple of guys, we'll put them in a suit, we'll have the puppeteers working the legs. But Winston, he couldn't really see it. He didn't see how this could possibly work. But he was, like so many other people are, he was sold by James Cameron's enthusiasm. So Cameron actually went so far as to sketch out a drawing of how the two puppeteers would operate the queen. The puppeteers would operate the queen's 4 arms while lying back to back in a body tray inside the torso of the queen. And Cameron actually proposed that they build a crude mock-up of the puppet out of foam and black garbage bags just to see if his concept would work. So they built this thing at Stan Winston's studio, his garage, or his warehouse at his studio. They built this thing that was sort of shaped like the alien queen, but a very crude rendition. And it worked to everyone's surprise, except, of course, James Cameron's, who was pretty confident that it was going to work.
Yeah.
And Winston, by the way, had to expand his crew. He had to hire a bunch more people. I think he expanded to a crew of about 40 during this time, mostly to work on Aliens, although because he had the expanded crew, he was able to also work on another film simultaneously, which was Tobe Hooper's Invaders from Mars.
Oh,
which just celebrated its anniversary a couple of days ago.
Nice.
I haven't seen it, but I want to.
Yeah, you didn't watch it when we did a whole episode on the podcast.
I'm just kidding. I'm joking. Yeah, guys.
So Winston's team set out to build the real thing after seeing that it could work. Although the final product was a bit more complex than Cameron's proposal. And in the end, it took 14 to 16 operators to move the Queen on set. The head, neck, and body were hydraulically controlled. The legs were puppeted externally using rods, and the face, lips, jaw, and tongue were operated by cables. So it's a very complex, very large puppet. This is not a miniature. The size of the alien queen that we see on the screen is how big that thing was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There's no miniature work.
It's pretty insane. And then, like the good part for Cameron coming into this movie is like most of the stuff had been designed prior to this, but the Queen was one of those things that like he came up with. And it feels like most of his story is people telling him or them saying like, come up with something for this, and then he does, and they're like, that can't be done, and then he does it. And he's bossing people around until they do it.
H.R. Geiger, who had been the creature designer for Scott's film, of course, we all know H.R. Geiger. He wasn't involved in the design process for Aliens at all, which was a decision that Cameron would later regret. And the reason, by the way, that Cameron didn't want H.R. Geiger on the set is because he was kind of afraid that another artist with as big of a vision as someone like H.R. Giger.
I think we called him Giger last time.
H.R. Giger. He was just afraid that Cameron was basically afraid that he wouldn't be able to get his own vision across if he was working with someone as visionary as H.R. Giger. That's kind of what it mounted to. Although, like I said, in later years, he would regret that and wish that he had gotten him involved in the film. But he did get a couple of other artists involved, a couple of other artists that he admired. And they were two guys named Sid Mead and Ron Cobb. Mead was known as a visual futurist in Hollywood. He had made a career out of creating vehicles in sci-fi movies like Blade Runner for Ridley Scott, in Tron. In this film, he'd be responsible for the massive Sulaco spaceship, the spaceship that transports Ripley and the Marines to LV-426. Ron Cobb is a guy that we've actually discussed before on the show back in our Dan O'Bannon series. This Cameron series is related. It seems to be linked to that Dan O'Bannon series in so many ways, other than just the fact that he's making a sequel to a Dan O'Bannon movie. But Cobb had actually designed, we actually talked about him before Alien, because he had designed the titular spaceship in Dark Star, which is John Carpenter's directorial debut, which was written by and co-starred Dan O'Bannon.
And James Cameron's, Jim's worked with John Carpenter on Escape from New York. And,
that's true.
He referenced last week. I mentioned a reference he made to Cronenberg. It's weird. It's almost as though you plotted all these out in this way that we can make all these weird connections, or just Hollywood is so incestual.
It's very incestuous. I definitely plan some series after others for a reason, but I'm constantly surprised by the connections that we end up finding as we do this. It's a Ron Cobb. He had also done some preliminary work on the original Alien back when O'Bannon was still developing it. I think even before Ridley Scott got involved with it. But more often than not, James Cameron simply used his own designs. I mean, most directors can't sketch, paint, and build things themselves the way that Cameron does. And he knows more than anyone else what he wants his designs to look like in the end. So there's none of this like going back and forth with an artist trying to get what the artist is doing to look like what the thing looks like in your head, right? So because Cameron has the talent as an artist to just do it himself. So oftentimes that's what he does.
Michael Biehn, they said like, what do you think makes Cameron so good at what he does and like how he's able to handle these things? And Michael Biehn even pointed out, he was like, it's that he seems to know everybody's job as good as they do. Like he just knows all the spots and he knows exactly what's supposed to be happening. And so he can jump in at any point in any position and tell you how it's supposed to be done.
And one of his designs was the power loader that Ripley uses to fight the Queen during the film's climax. And that power loader was inspired by Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers. In the novel, we actually talked a little bit about this on our Starship Troopers episode back last year. But in the novel, it's not in Verhoeven's film, but in the original book, the infantry troops wear exoskeletal suits in combat.
It's not until like the sixth sci-fi B movie version that I think they finally start using them.
Well, they're a little bit different than they are also in this, because in Starship Troopers they like jump around, like they can jump really far distances. So they didn't put them in the movie of Starship Troopers because they thought that would look goofy, and it would, honestly.
But he was a fan of this design, like, or this concept.
Of course. I mean, even if we talked about his early short film Xenogenesis on our Terminator episode, and if you watch that movie, you will see that the power loader is a design that he's had in the back of his mind, just waiting for an opportunity to use for quite a while, because he 100% has a power loader in that little short film.
It was, we talked about that on the last movie, but it's fucking, man, I watched this movie as a kid, and throughout my whole life, I've seen this movie, and I've had always, it wasn't until this time that I've been like, well, James Cameron fucking made a power loader. Like, why are we not making like huge exoskeletons? Like, that just seems like it's easy to do. He clearly did. That's not CG. It's
a suit,
but it's
it's got a guy in it.
It's got a fucking guy in it.
There's a guy,
like a stunt performer in there. It's
He's got a big burly man in it.
A big burly British 270-pound man inside that suit, and he sits there, and he's got like a little control for the arms, and it like literally is a guy in a suit.
It was
like
assisted
Ripley
by
is
cranes.
Him. Yeah, it's like holding up, helping bear the weight of the actual thing, so he doesn't just like fall over.
But Ripley's basically sitting on a guy's lap.
Yeah, it's doing that. He says in the commentary, it's like the dad with the daughter that like walks on his feet, like they're like she's sitting there and like they walk together.
Yeah,
and it's just it's so weird.
It's really funny to think about. Yeah, it's really funny to think about. Although I guess I never thought, like, how else would you do it with pre-CGI? You know, they didn't have to build this thing.
You build a fucking power suit. That's what you do.
Now, it's funny, as we've talked about this, an episode and a half in now, we've joked a few times about James Cameron having a reputation as being kind of a dick, but so far, as we've discussed these movies so far, he seems kind of okay, like maybe he's a little self-confident. You could say that he's maybe a little arrogant, but he hasn't done anything like nefarious or anything. He hasn't been really a dick to anyone in particular. His cast seems to like him. I mean, he makes friends left and right. He's buddies with Lance Henriksen, Bill Paxton. Like he's making friends. So like, where do all these stories come from?
I feel like you're going to tell us.
Well, I'm going to say, I have an idea of where that reputation began. Well, let's talk about the filming of Aliens, with that said. So production on Aliens took place at Pinewood Studios. Now, we've talked about Pinewood before here on the show. This is the famous soundstage where it's located a little bit outside of London, where everything from The Shining to James Bond to Star Wars have been filmed, or in the realm of movies that we've talked about on Cinema Shock very recently, for one of them, Little Shop of Horrors was filmed there. And parts of The Dark Knight were filmed there as well, way back, the beginning of Cinema Shock. It's this legendary studio that houses some of the largest sound stages in the world, which was a perfect environment for Cameron, for the world that he was trying to create in Aliens. But it did come with a few challenges. So in the 80s in England, studios came with a crew attached. So meaning that if you wanted to shoot at Pinewood Studios supplied the crews, these guys who had been working for Pinewood Studios for years, decades, some of them. But because of this, a lot of the crew at Pinewood, they were lifers, and they just viewed the job as any other job, just like they would if it was a factory job. Just because they were making movies didn't matter to them. They often didn't care about the artistry going into the product. This was just a job for a worker. Might as well be working on an assembly line. It's a paycheck gig, nothing more. This could not be any more different than the young, passionate crews that Cameron and Hurd had worked on back in their Roger Corman days and even on the Terminator. Here's what Cameron had to say. Gail and I were shocked to be working with people who simply couldn't care less about the film they were working on. The Pinewood crew were lazy, insolent, and arrogant. There were a few bright lights amongst the younger art people, but for the most part, we despised them and they despised us. So the way that these crews were used to working was so different than what Cameron was used to, and very different from what is kind of the norm on an American film set. On American film sets, crews were working 12 hours a day on average. Cameron was used to pushing his crew sometimes to 14-hour workdays. But the Pinewood guys, they were used to having breaks at 10 and at 2. And then at 5 o'clock, they're ready to punch out and go home. Like I said, this is a factory job for them.
Yeah.
And those 2 breaks, the 10 and 2, those were not like lunchtime. This is tea time.
Yep.
This is so there was a union. This is a union crew, and part of the union mandate was that twice a day the doors open. Doesn't matter what's happening. The doors open, and a woman pushing a tea trolley would come in, and the crew would just drop everything to have tea. Didn't matter if they were in the middle of a big special effects shoot. They've got fog, special effects smoke everywhere. At 10 o'clock. They're opening that door. Tea trolley comes in. All that special effects smoke is gone out the door, and they're having tea.
I saw Peter Lamont, production designer on Octopussy, like he was a part of this. I was wondering if it had anything to do with Pinewood. I didn't have a chance to look at that, but Cameron gives him a lot of credit. But yeah, I mean,
we'll talk about him extensively here in a few minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll hang tight. But yeah, I mean, you hear any of the other actors talk about this, like it's just like these guys didn't know how to work.
Yeah, like they were lazy, and which Cameron says as well in that quote I just read.
Yeah.
But the crew also seemed to resent Cameron. At this time, when they were filming this, the Terminator had not been released in England yet. So they saw Cameron as this kind of young, inexperienced punk who was trying to make the sequel to a masterpiece and one that was directed by a Brit.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah,
Cameron,
that'll do it.
He even tried to hold Terminator screenings for the crew to show them what he had done, but no one would show up for him. Like they just didn't care. They would not show up. They simply did not respect him. And in England, there was this sense at the time that you didn't move up the ladder based on talent. You did it by putting in your time and paying your dues. So they didn't see Cameron. They saw this 31-year-old kid who didn't deserve to direct a movie of this size because he had not paid his dues. They saw Heard, who was a 29-year-old female producer who was married to the director, as kind of a joke. Heard would she actually said that when she would like interview crew members for various positions on the set, some of them would tell her that they didn't take orders from a woman. So this is what they're dealing with. A crew that simply doesn't respect either of them at all.
Wow.
Contentions between this English crew and Cameron and Heard kind of continued to escalate. And a lot of that conflict was due to a guy named Derek Cracknell, which is the movie's first assistant director. Now, Cracknell, he was very well respected among the crew because he had been Stanley Kubrick's assistant director, having worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange. Should also probably mention that he worked on Tobe Hooper's Life Force as well, because that's a movie we've talked about here on the show. And this guy, man, he was continuously trying to undermine Cameron and Heard's authority, deliberately setting up shots differently than how Cameron had requested because he thought that he knew better than Cameron. And honestly, it kind of seems like he probably felt that he was more qualified to direct the film than Cameron was.
It was probably a tough position for Cameron too, because remember how much he like idolizes 2001.
Yeah, right. Imagine how shitty that feels for James Cameron. Like this movie 2001 that essentially compelled him to become a movie director. He loves this movie. He idolizes 2001. And the guy who was essentially like Kubrick's right-hand man on that film is working on your movie, but he's an asshole. Like that's what he's dealing with.
He thinks you're a piece of shit.
Right. This guy, he'd refer to Cameron as Governor and Grizzly Adams because Cameron had a beard at the time. So they which is a dumb insult. But, yeah. So he's dealing with this. And then there were also issues with the film's original cinematographer, who was a veteran English director of photography named Dick Bush.
I got nothing.
Oh, come on, man. After all of that. Damn, dude.
No, let's be honest. I don't blame Dick Bush. He's probably naturally grumpy. He's born with a lot of baggage. So he's just it's a tough life.
He's from down south, isn't he?
South London, I believe.
If you visit our sponsor, manscaped.com.
Hey, there we go.
if only they were, that would be a perfect segue.
You won't have to worry about the Dick Bush anytime in your future.
See, this is where we need a Ron Gronkowski going, oh man, my English director of photography is really getting out of hand. What do I do, babe?
Oh man,
you got to get rid of that Dick Bush.
But Bush's performance, among other issues, was causing Cameron and Hurd to fall behind on their shooting schedule, which was already set at a very ambitious 75 days. I mean, 75 days to shoot a movie with this many special effects is already pushing it. But they were running even further behind, so they fired Bush and replaced him with Adrian Biddle. Now, Biddle, he was pretty young at the time. He was in his early 30s and had gotten to start working under Ridley Scott, actually. He'd been the director of photography for Scott's groundbreaking 1984 commercial for Apple, which, aired at during the Super Bowl. It's like one of the most famous commercials of all time.
Yeah, that chick runs in with the big hammer and spins and throws it. Yeah.
Aliens was...
You're talking about Thor?
Talking about Love and Thunder, yes.
Okay.
The Aliens was Biddle's first credit on a feature film, but he would go on to have a pretty amazing career as a director of photography. He worked on movies like The Princess Bride, Willow, and Event Horizon, which I personally love.
Hey, man, I'll not talk shit about Event Horizon.
His last credit before his death in 2005 was V for Vendetta. And if I remember correctly from that episode we did on V for Vendetta, I believe he died before the movie came out, like after shooting was done, but before the premiere of the film.
It is the tough part about making all these, for if anybody wonders. I always think about like experts that you see pop up on screen for like a lot of these documentaries and stuff. I'm like, they had to know what they were talking about. They read a bunch of stuff again. They went back over their shit beforehand.
Right.
This is too much to remember all of this, because people will reference to me in my Instagram DMs, like they'll make a joke about something. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
And it was something we talked about.
Yeah.
Maybe only 3 episodes ago.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, dude.
Well, the thing is, my brain can only
beers and episodes ago.
Yeah. And my brain can only hold so much information. Like it has to expunge some of it, So not long after he cut Bush out, Cameron and Hurd also gave Cracknell his notice.
They trimmed him. They trimmed him.
Yeah, he got trimmed from the crew. And they also gave Cracknell his notice, which caused the crew, who, remember, idolized this guy, to break out into complete mutiny. All of the tension that had been building between Cameron and the crew just kind of boiled over. They actually referred to it as the tea trolley mutiny. Wow. But at Cracknell's urging, in the middle of a shooting day, the Pinewood crew put down their tools and just stopped working in protest. So this puts Cameron and Hurd in kind of a tight spot, because there were a lot of films shooting in England at the time. So they couldn't just hire another crew. They had to fix this. So they called Fox to try to figure out what to do. Cameron was ready to straight up move the entire production out of England, which would have been logistically probably pretty difficult at this point. But Hurd kind of talked him out of that. And instead they called a family meeting. Cameron basically called the entire crew in, spoke to them very frankly about some of the issues that they'd been having. He said to them, I can't do this on my own, but I also can't have a situation where it seems like the crew is working to prove that the endeavor is going to be a failure. If you have a problem with that, you've got to step forward, because we've got to replace you. And he just told him straight out, we got to cut the shit. And this meeting lasted for hours, with crew members airing their grievances over the long days, the long hours. And in the end, the assistant director's crew, they agreed to be more supportive of Cameron, and Cameron agreed to be a little more sensitive to their tea time.
Yeah, it's tough, I guess, if that's what they're used to. But, nobody else... The cast and stuff don't have any sympathy to this. I mean, I know Bill Pullman called him as oh, these people have
Bill Pullman.
Sorry, I did it on accident for real that time. Bill Paxton, he said they have this real indentured servant attitude, about everything they did. Michael Biehn is Hurd actually gave a couple of times. I saw references to Hurd giving. She gave Biehn a lot of credit, saying your enthusiasm really helped get us going. You stayed positive constantly on set, and he was very much because I know what this will turn out like. I know that this made my whole life. The last movie, really nailed it for
made his career.
Yeah. So he's so I get it. He's I'm fine. He's they just don't understand 14-hour days, and that's part of this process. But I don't know,
it's part of making a movie. And Cameron, even after this meeting, after they kind of agreed to get along, they still never really got along. Like they never really like warmed to each other, you know, but they were able to reconcile enough to finish the movie. And then on the last day of the shoot, Cameron gathered the crew once more. You know, the directors always give this big speech when it's the last day of the shoot, thanking everyone, you know, for all their hard work. And he brings them in and he says, this is a quote. "This has been a long and difficult shoot, fraught by many problems. But the one thing that kept me going through it all was the certain knowledge that one day I would drive out of the gates of Pinewood and never come back, and that you sorry bastards would still be here." Now
he's like a regular General Patton. This guy.
He's like a regular President Bill Pullman,
President Bill Paxton. This guy.
Now, you may be thinking to yourself, because this is what I thought, is that it doesn't really sound like Cameron's being a dick. It kind of sounds like his crew was being a bunch of dicks, right? Is that how that reads to you?
Yeah,
that's what it that's how it came across to me. But I do think that this situation, the Tea Trolley mutiny, I think this is the beginning of Cameron's reputation as some sort of totalitarian. So we'll see how this grows among further films. But in this case, and granted, you know, we're not necessarily getting every side of the story. The books and interviews I read that references, they're not interviewing any of these crew members. They're interviewing Paxton, Michael Biehn, they're James Cameron. They're interviewing the guys on Cameron's side, not necessarily the other guys. So obviously there's two sides to every story, but to me, it seems like these guys were set in their ways and they didn't like this young Yank, even though he wasn't a Yank. They saw him as a Yank coming in and telling them what to do and telling them to do things differently than how they'd been used to doing them for years.
But I mean, I guess to try to play devil's advocate for a second, as much as deep and broad as Cameron's knowledge of film production and the industry in general, you'd think he would have kind of known that of kind of like, hey, this is kind of how things work at Pinewood.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, he's not like a film historian or anything. Like he knows all the roles. He knows how to do different technical jobs, but he's not like, he'd never been to England. He'd never been to Pinewood or worked there. And he'd only worked on one movie set as a director. He'd only worked on a handful of movie sets at all, you know?
That's true.
And the ones he had worked on had been very small, very low budget. They certainly weren't shooting on the most famous soundstage in the world. So it's a very different world that he's been kind of thrown into.
Yeah.
And not all of the film scenes were shot at Pinewood. A lot of them were like, you know, the planet exterior, things like that, or those were all shot on Pinewood. But for the Alien Queen's Nest, production designer Peter Lamont found a decommissioned coal plant in West London that would be a perfect environment to use. And Cameron loved it because it had like these like walkways with grates, you know, that he could shoot through and have light going through. It was like perfect for what he wanted. And it is a great, outstanding set, I think. So, but a quick note on Lamont, real quick, because I said we'd talk about him. Peter Lamont, he had been working in the British film industry in some form or another since the late 1940s. But when I look at his history, what's most impressive to me is how many James Bond movies he worked on. His first job on a James Bond movie was on 1964's Goldfinger, the third James Bond movie, where he worked as a draftsman. So basically, he's designing things. He doesn't have a credit on that. Draftsmen don't typically get credits on films, but that was his first official job on a Bond movie. But he would go on to work on 18 Bond movies, usually as either an art director or a production designer. He worked on every Bond movie from Goldfinger to Casino Royale, with the sole exception of Tomorrow Never Dies.
Oh, wow.
He worked on every single one from Connery to Daniel Craig. Isn't that wild?
Yeah. Holy crap.
That is wild to me. Man, but an amazing career. But anyway, back to Alien. So Peter Lamont found this perfect space that Cameron loved. And it had just one problem. It was completely covered in asbestos, which they had to clean. The air had to be cleared of contaminants, and then the air quality had to be tested multiple times a day to make sure they weren't like killing the cast and the crew. And to further turn it into the kind of gross, gooey alien nest that we see in the film, Stan Winston and his crew had to cover the set in alien slime, which they basically just created by smearing KY jelly on everything. Can you imagine can you imagine if you're like the guy accepting the mail that day and just like this pallets of KY jelly come in?
I mean, I was going to say, to be fair, I mean,
addressed to Stan Winston, like, hey, what is Stan getting up to tonight?
No, I was going to say, this is how I live most of my life. That's how I handle most problems. Is just smear KY jelly,
KY on everything.
Smear some KY all over your dick bush and just.
That would be. God. That sounds incredibly uncomfortable. And
open the doors and have tea time, baby. Yeah.
So Lamont used his expertise to find other used items for the production as well, including the undercarriage of an old Vulcan helicopter that was transformed into the Marines dropship, and a tow truck that British Airways had used to tow 747s. That's their like vehicle that they used to transport the Marines from the dropship into the building. You know, that they go riding on later. It's a
badass vehicle.
It's really cool, but that was originally a tow truck that British Airways used, and it was used to tow airplanes. So this thing is incredibly heavy. So they actually had to like reinforce the floors, or anywhere in the studio that it was going to drive on had to be reinforced because it was so heavy, because it's such a strong vehicle to be able to pull airplanes.
I didn't see the Vulcan helicopter come up in everybody in Star Trek. Todd.
Oh yeah. My apologies.
And Lamont's knack for reusing found items came in handy when it was time to film the scene where Ripley and the Marines come out of hypersleep. So by this point in the production, they were running out of money, and Hurd and Fox decided that this scene could just be cut. We don't need it. Let's cut it out. But it was essentially the reason they wanted to cut it is because they didn't have the money to build a set. They didn't have the money to build this big hypersleep room. So it was really just a production design issue, and Lamont wanted to try to figure it out. And he came up with a solution based on a pretty old-fashioned idea. Instead of building this huge set full of hypersleep chambers, he would just build 4 chambers. And then he stuck a mirror in there to make the Sulaco seem enormous. And I watched the movie again after finding this out, and you can kind of tell if you're looking for it, but if you're not looking for it, it's seamless. So because I think there are 8 hypersleep pods in that, but the back 4 are just a reflection of the first 4, and you would never know. It's pretty cool.
Crazy.
That's awesome.
I love that idea because it seems like the kind of idea that would come from a Roger Corman veteran, not an established Pinewood Studios journeyman. You know, it seems like the kind of solution you'd have to make on a low budget Roger Corman set. So it seemed like with Lamont, Cameron had kind of found an ally amongst these Pinewood crew members, you know, which is probably why he later brought him back for True Lies. And he actually brought him out of retirement for Titanic, a movie for which Lamont won his first and only Oscar.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah, that's why I wanted to mention him earlier. He gives him credit for a lot of conceptual design, like in interviews I read, along with the other guys we talked about. I don't know. There was still some really clever things going on with these. I mean, one of the things I never even thought about before, but if you think about, sorry if I'm jumping around here, but like in Alien, think about when we talked about that with Dan O'Bannon, like, you know, the initial xenomorph was like a 7 foot tall dude like in a costume, you know, and they couldn't find a bunch of 7 foot tall guys for this. And so they used like these, I mean, they hired like stunt performers and stuff so that because generally the humans and the xenomorphs wouldn't be seen in the same frame anyway.
And honestly, even in the original Alien, you can never really tell how tall he is. Like that sort. I mean, that's a cool bit of trivia about that movie, but it doesn't really matter in the original Alien. Like you can't ever really tell how tall that xenomorph is.
Yeah,
that's a good point. You know, there was all this stuff like that happened. I mean, so the Roger Corman school of thought is not lost. I mean, you know, we mentioned earlier like the Steadicam mounts being used for the machine guns and that stuff. I mean, and the Velcro, by the way, on the Steadicams kept falling apart, and so they had to actually like duct tape these people to the mounts to like carry the guns. So like Rolston,
they were apparently really heavy too.
Yeah, I was gonna say Rolston and Goldstein said later that they were like taped to these smart guns for so long they were having like nightmares about them.
Jeez.
One interesting little, random tidbit I thought was the alien nest that's there. It was later used for the Axis chemical set for Batman.
No shit.
Nice.
Yeah, they said when the Batman crew first got there, they found like most of the nest was still intact. Like
that's fun.
Yeah, just a random bit of trivia.
That's fun. So when it came time to edit the movie, Cameron hired another Kubrick alum, a guy named Ray Lovejoy, who was the editor of 2001: A Space Odyssey. But in kind of another example of the what I'm seeing as the old never meet your heroes idiom, this didn't quite work out the way that Cameron wanted. Like he was really excited to have this guy who edited 2001 working on his film. And Lovejoy is a great editor. But he was used to the editing films at kind of a very different pace than what Cameron wanted. Cameron liked quick editing, especially in his action sequences, where he would insert blank flash frames to kind of accelerate the tempo. So you'd have like a single frame here and there where it's just flashing white, often while guns are being shot. And it just kind of keeps the action moving. But at a time when editing took place manually in an editing bay where film had to be physically cut and spliced back together, putting a frame or two of white into a scene was painstaking work. Oh, and it's funny you should mention Batman, Gary, because Ray Lovejoy edited Batman.
Oh, that's wild.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
A couple years after this, Ray Lovejoy edited Batman as well. Editing and other post-production delays put the film even further behind schedule, which caused an issue for the film's composer, James Horner. I was honestly expecting Todd to have already mentioned James Horner because James Horner, who's a legendary film composer, one of his many well-known scores was Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. And he did Star Trek 3 as well. He did those back to back. So I was expecting him to be on Star Trek, but maybe you didn't use him because he was not a cast member. So
I tend to focus on the cast members. It's when there's nobody in the cast that I start scrolling through the entire crew.
Yeah, but James Horner has worked on Star Trek a couple of times and done some great work. But he started his career working on low budget fare. Kicking off the 80s with a duo of Roger Corman produced films. He did Humanoids from the Deep and he did Galaxy of Terror, which, as we know, also employed a young James Cameron. But dude, James Horner, like, look at his filmography. Like, when you get done listening to this episode, just go look him up on IMDb. Like, it is one of the most legendary careers you'll ever see from a composer. I mean, he went on to score Walter Hill's 48 Hours, Willow, Field of Dreams, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, The Rocketeer, Hocus Pocus, Braveheart, Apollo 13, Jumanji. Like, I can't name all the films that he has composed that you're familiar with. Basically, this guy created the background music for your entire childhood is what he did. So he's amazing. And his work here is good, but it's not his best work, I think. And I think that's because of the time constraints that he had on it. So by the time that Ray Lovejoy had locked in reels for Horner to compose, it was less than 2 weeks before the scheduled scoring session with the London Symphony Orchestra, which was cut down from the original 7 weeks of prep time that he was supposed to have. But because Ray Lovejoy had taken so long to edit, then he didn't have a movie to score to. And they had already hired the London Symphony Orchestra. So they couldn't just cancel the session without forfeiting their entire fee that they had paid to hire them. And this naturally caused a lot of tension, but it caused a lot of tension between Horner and Cameron because they didn't really know how to work with each other at this time. They're both very early in their career. Cameron had never worked with an orchestral composer before. Brad Fiedel, who had done the score for Terminator, did it solo on a synthesizer, mostly on a synthesizer, but he didn't have like a big orchestra. And Horner had worked on some movies, but he hadn't worked with a lot of directors yet at this point. So they're both young and dumb, and well, they're not dumb, but they're both young and fairly inexperienced working with the other like this. So this caused a lot of tension between them, but of course the two would learn to work together better later on because Horner returned to score both Titanic and Avatar down the line.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about that he was a little disappointed with this one because of the timing and everything like that. He says he reused several scores. Actually, the reason I knew what you were talking about Star Trek is he mentions he used I want to say it was from Star Trek 2 and 3. There's some like beats from both of those soundtracks that he reuses in this movie or something like that. I want to say it was at least Wrath of Khan. He said he had to.
Yeah, Wrath of Khan he had already done by this point because Wrath of Khan was 82.
Yeah, and then maybe it was something he was planning on for 3 or something. I don't remember. He talked about a lot of stuff he was having to like build off of other stuff he already had made to make this. And Ray Lovejoy, like you said, he was used to a slow pace. He had done like 2001 A Space Odyssey, and Cameron was going to fire him and considered Mark Goldblatt from the Terminator. Lovejoy apparently during this, like he had grabbed all of the footage from a story I read, especially during the final battle, which was like a big deal. He said that he was going to get fired. He was going to bring on like Mark Goldblatt or Peter Boyetta, who'd already been brought on to edit like the more dialogue driven scenes or whatever. Ray Lovejoy like stole all the footage and locked himself in an editing suite over a weekend and like edited everything by himself and then brought it out and showed it to Cameron the next week. And it worked because Cameron actually was impressed and was like, all right, fine.
They just had to light a fire under him, I guess.
Yeah. And he said he just allowed him to stay on board and supervise the final edit and all of that. And it worked. Yeah. Like you said, I mean, Lovejoy is going to later receive an Oscar nomination for best film editing for this movie. So,
but even with a finished film, Cameron still ran into a few difficulties. His movie, for one, was way too long, clocking in at nearly 2 hours and 45 minutes. And he couldn't really decide where to make the cuts. So Gail Ann Hurd actually made a bold suggestion. She recommended cutting the film's entire third reel, which is the part of the film where Ripley's daughter is revealed and the LV-426 colony is shown before the aliens attack. We actually meet Newt much earlier on in the film. So that's what they did. They cut it completely. They cut the entire reel out. And along with a few other cuts here and there. Throughout the film, but that was the big chunk of it. And that pared the film down to 2 hours and 17 minutes, which is still long, but it was a length that they could convince the studio to release. And when the film was released on July 18th, 1986, it did gangbusters business, bringing in over $130 million worldwide. It remained the highest grossing film in the Alien franchise until Alien Covenant was released in 2017. Although I did the math, and if you adjust it for inflation, Aliens actually beats Covenant by about $50 million.
Nice.
So technically, if you go by inflation, Aliens is still the highest grossing film in the entire Aliens franchise.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it also received.
I say Prometheus is the.
No, Prometheus did poorly.
Shut your whore mouth.
Yeah, I fucking hate that movie. It also received generally positive reviews from critics. Gary, we were talking, I can't remember if this was actually in our episode or if it was just me and you talking off mic, but you mentioned to me the Roger Ebert review for Alien, so I'm just going to read a little bit of it here. The whole review is honestly worth reading because it's a really fun review.
It is a fantastic review.
But here's my favorite quote from it, from Roger Ebert. He said, he gave it 3.5 stars, I believe. And he said, "The movie made me feel bad. It filled me with feelings of unease and disquiet and anxiety. I walked outside and I didn't want to talk to anyone. I was drained. I'm not sure Aliens is what we mean by entertainment, yet I have to be accurate about this movie. It is a superb example of filmmaking craft." And the whole review reads like that. The whole review is him going, "Oh man, this movie is like really well made and really good, but I didn't like it," is basically what he's saying. But he still gives it 3.5 stars because he admits like how well made it was, you know.
It's like he describes it. He describes fucking Aliens as though like the first time I watched Martyrs, or something.
Right? Yes. Yeah. Like you felt bad about being alive as a person.
Yeah.
It's like, I kind of wish I was dead, but
Right.
it's a good movie. It did its job.
It did what it was supposed to do. It sounds to me, reading that review, like maybe Roger Ebert, after seeing Aliens, could have used a nap.
No, 100% sure Roger Ebert could have used a map. And God, let me tell you something. There are so many people that had negative things to say about Aliens. But I'm gonna talk I'm gonna talk to you Zennials for a second. You seem to have a hatred for James Cameron, and I don't know why that is. But fucking stop it.
Yeah, I don't understand it. I really don't. Like, I don't understand why people have a hate on for him, because his movies are generally almost. I mean, I would say all of them are pretty good on one level or another. Like,
I'm gonna say this, Justin, and you're gonna hate this, and I'm gonna say this, but it almost feels like, to an extent, like it's like, oh God, I'm gonna hate myself for saying this. I'm gonna say it.
Now I gotta hear it.
I wanted to say, like, he almost feels like people are trying to turn him to like the Imagine Dragons of like movie making. Like,
no, you Imagine Dragons.
No, it's just that like he like well crafts, like he creates hits, and like people are like, fuck you for knowing exactly what people want to hear and using it commercially. Like, you're just like, it in that sense, it feels like the same thing to me so far. So it's like, and again, and I'm not like some huge Imagine Dragons fan or anything. I'm just saying,
no, they're
like every
awful.
song I've heard from Imagine Dragons, I've been like, yeah, it's catchy, whatever.
No, I mean, I hate Imagine Dragons because,
but so many people hate Imagine Dragons, and I'm like, they just know how to write songs that are number one songs.
I just feel like Imagine Dragons. This is not a music podcast, but I feel like they write every song to be in a car commercial.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that I feel like James Cameron's much different. Like, I feel like James Cameron's like, I want to be crafty. I want to be okay. I'll give him this. He does have a passion, and he is an artist. I'm not taking that away from him, but he also seems to, like, every movie, he knows, like, he's just like, no, this will work.
Yeah,
this will make money. Like, this is what these motherfuckers want, and I'm gonna give it to them. And I mean, it's a talent. I mean, there's respect to be given there. But anyway, the point is that there's a lot of reviews I could go through that are people that just hate James Cameron. I'm not gonna do that here. I've got to be better about on the somebody needs a nap to get really down and dirty on the people that really should fucking take a nap. It's hard on James Cameron, but I'm gonna try. So let's get started. Donald King says, Ridley Scott once made a brilliant sci-fi film called Alien. Many years later, he made an equally brilliant prequel called Prometheus. I already know I lost Justin.
I'm out of here.
In the years between, people tried to make their own sequels. One of these people was a man called James Cameron. First, he decided to make his version sentimental by introducing an irritating child that kept screaming so Ripley could say dumb shit to reassure it. Fortunately, David Fincher had the brat killed off in his version. Wow. Cameron also decided he would have the film dominated by a group of U.S. Marines. These Marines were to have the combined IQ of about -5. All the Marines said things like, let's go, oh my God, and what is that? Most irritating of all was Bill Paxton. Shame on you, Bill. He ended every sentence with the word, man. Irritating. Fortunately for the viewer, the alien soon disemboweled him. The heroine of the film was to be given lines just as bad as the Marines. The aliens were not scary, no matter how many there were. The spaceships looked secondhand. The Marines shot at the aliens with their huge weaponry. Lance Henderson got his head blown off, but he carried on talking. Happily, when the Marines were killed, death applied to their tonsils too. After this success, Mr. Cameron got to make a 3-hour-long film about a ship that was perfectly designed, and it sank too.
I hate that.
Harry Plinkett says it's evil. This film is outright evil. These are images that belong in hell, and no decent human should recreate them or watch them. If you do watch it, your soul will suffer.
Wow, is this guy like just saying that? Is he just being like very? I don't know what the word is, but is he real? Is he being for real?
I don't know.
That's my question. Is that remember the guy from last week that was called John 3:16 talking about Terminator being a porno?
Let's see here. Here is D Getz. My brother loved it. This is 1 star. Wait, I just had to get this one. 1 star. Aliens was a hit is the title of this review. My brother loved it. He already has the first Alien movie. This is one of his favorite movies. Thank you. I have to add those in because I'm just like, he fucking gave this a 1 star review.
Stupid. People don't know how the star rating works, right, Todd?
Yeah, a bunch of dummies.
I appreciate your patience, Todd. I'm going to continue on with Cornelius, who says, very disappointing. James Cameron is no Ridley Scott. The script by Cameron used stock characters, speaking in melodramatic, cliched language, poor storytelling, and everything is a retread from Alien. A great film. Oh, I think he said Alien is a great film. Alien, a great film. Save your time and money on this clunker. Cameron focuses on the technology and special effects, but leaves a huge hole in his film due to lame screenplay. What about Becky? She says, in this conservative cultural backlash from the 1980s, our badass practical heroine has to become a mommy who calls other strong female characters a sexist slur. Also, Vasquez is a white woman in brown face.
She's not wrong.
Lawnwatch says, holy shit, this sucked. Boring, repetitive, and goes on for way too long. It's like a bad version of Alien and Avatar. By the way, I think this is his first attempt at making Avatar because half the props are the same. That's what he said.
What?
I don't get that at all. That's what he said. That's what he fucking said.
What is it? What was he talking about?
I didn't realize
because there are power loaders in Avatar, but they're military style. But other than that, and the inclusion of a Sigourney Weaver, who is not a prop. I don't know what they're talking about.
I'm sorry. I know I have a lot of these, but let's keep going. What about Lunchbox, who says, had a sudden urge to watch this while cutting radishes from my salad this morning. I spent my lunches in the first week of 9th grade fixed up by riddling and trying to do the knife trick with a ballpoint pen. By the end of the week, my left hand was all flaps of skin, blue and red with ink and blood. The high school guidance counselor was worried that I'd been demonstrating some form of psychosis, but I assured him, I'm just trying to do the knife thing from Aliens. He seemed satisfied. This movie rules, but it sucks.
What? I feel like, and this is not necessarily with that one. I mean, that guy's clearly just trying to be funny. But you mentioned the Zennials, I guess, earlier, and it made me think a lot of the people, especially on Letterboxd, I feel like a lot of people are just trying to be witty in their reviews without taking any sort of the actual quality of the film into account. Does that make sense?
It's true. These last few, including that one, are from Letterboxd. So Letterboxd is using my last hit. And so, like, for instance, this here from Josh, he gave that a 0.5 star, who said, no, fuck that little girl.
I mean, that's just mean. Would you leave her to die? That's rude.
Here's Aled, who gives it a 0.5 star and says, I forgot how shitty this is. I struggle to understand how someone could take everything good about Alien and throw it to one side in favor of an annoyingly American war/action movie. Exceptions are the scenes with the face hugger and the ceiling bit.
The ceiling bit?
That's what they said.
Yeah, where he pokes his head up and they're all crawling towards him.
That is good. It looks like some like cockroaches coming at you. Yeah.
This is Sue, who says, for like 4 lines. It says, what a fucking travesty. It looks like a pay-per-view porno parody. Holy fuck, so lame. I'm calling for a 10th crusade to reclaim Alien from James Cameron's hack fingers.
I hate everything about these.
0.5 star from Jack, who says, such an awful movie in every way. Boring, unoriginal, badly made. This whole goddamn movie looks like a Universal Studios ride. Why are the actors staged in a conga line? Bruh, I want a laser tag like this for my birthday. Cardboard Batmobile, Play-Doh practical effects, Reebok shoe close-up count, 3.
That's just somebody trying to be funny. And like the idea of saying that this, regardless of what you think of this movie, and generally most people think it is a masterpiece, to say that it's badly made is like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know?
All right, two more real quick. Here's a half star from Ben, who says, you all deserve jail time for convincing me this movie was supposed to be a masterpiece. This is embarrassing. It's embarrassingly terrible. It's beyond terrible. I'm in disbelief. I started it last night and turned it off after an hour, but I finished it just now only so I can move on with the rest of the series. And I like the rest of these films, the ones I've seen at least. Alien is among my favorite horror movies. It's honestly among my favorite movies in general. And I dig Prometheus and Covenant. And I know it's not a movie, but Alien Isolation is super underrated. This, however, feels like it's from a completely different series. Some of this might come down to me just not liking James Cameron. Aside from Terminator and T2 to a much lesser extent, I think he's a total hack. And this movie is so dumb. It looks cheap and awful. It's boring. The action is lame. The dialogue is a joke. The set design is garbage. There's just nothing here that's even mildly worthwhile. It completely shits all over the first movie, not only turning a masterpiece of tension and horror into an action movie, but turning it into a terrible action movie. It's like someone made an action sequel to The Shining. It sucked and then somehow became more beloved than the original. Maybe things were different when this came out. Maybe I'm missing something. I know I'm probably wrong since everybody seems to love this film, but I'm writing this off as complete cheap garbage for now, and I won't be revisiting this for a long time.
These reviews are giving me a headache. This is first of all, that guy shitting on this movie and then immediately praising Prometheus and Covenant means that they clearly have horrible taste films. And also like the idea of saying that this is a bad movie because it's so stylistically differently from the first, but then praising the later movies. Have you seen Alien 3? Have you seen Alien Resurrection? The unique thing about the Alien franchise is, especially in those first 4, is that every movie feels completely different because they get these directors who have a very unique vision to take over every single time. And that's one thing I like about this franchise so much, honestly, because it's like letting other like very talented auteur type directors play in the sandbox that is the world that Ridley Scott and Dan O'Bannon created in the first film.
I'm not going to disagree with that, but for the final, this is from Canon History. I assume not like Canon Movies, actually.
Probably not.
They give it a half star. But Canon History, who really, really needs a nap, says, I hate this movie. I wish it didn't exist. I despise it. I loathe it. I abhor it. James Cameron, fuck you, took everything that made the original Alien a great film and threw it away like it didn't matter. I don't care if this is technically a good movie. They did it with like all the caps and like
the SpongeBob meme. Yeah.
I don't care if this is technically a good movie. It mangled and destroyed everything the original stood for. I didn't just fucking spit on Ridley Scott's masterpiece. I shat on it. I've dipped my toes in the Alien community, and it shows just how much this disgrace has ruined a potentially niche fan group. Now every piece of media but Alien Isolation, God bless that game, has followed the ignominious, this guy's already smarter than me, ignominious shadow of this revolting sequel. I truly enjoyed the action sequences, and the relationship between Ripley and Newt is awesome. However, if only it wasn't this movie. Wherefore out will God forsake us with such a tragedy? If only, wherefore out did doth hath to best this one? Wherefore couldn't best something else? Oh, the misery! Thine shan't look upon thee, but with the seldom passion of misprise. Truly, this is an example of a horrible miscalculation. Every night I cry in bed thinking of this movie. It has destroyed all I hold dear, lest we forget.
You know, when someone comes up with just like this ruined fandom or this ruined my childhood or whatever, I'm always like, you know what? Yeah, I feel so bad for you that your life is so shallow that you have nothing else going on in your life that a sequel of something or a remake or a reboot or whatever ruined your childhood. Like,
it makes me think of that
fragile. Like, maybe pick something else.
Makes me think of that episode of South Park where they talk about raping their childhood, you know, with the Indiana Jones 4, I think it was. But fuck that guy, because I'm with Todd. That's exactly what I was thinking throughout that review, is that this guy's just, he's shitting on it because he even admits that it's a well-made movie and that he likes some of the character development, but he doesn't like the direction that it takes because it's not the same movie that Ridley Scott made. Who the fuck wants to watch the same movie twice? Like, I will never understand people who want the sequel to a successful movie to just be the same movie all over again. That doesn't make any sense to me. Just watch the original movie. I don't need to see it again. You know, that doesn't make any sense. And Aliens, I don't think this, and this is not just my opinion, this is kind of general consensus. I think it's in contention as one of the greatest sequels of all time. It is the Godfather 2 of genre movies, I think. I mean, I prefer the Lovecraftian haunted house dread of Ridley Scott's original movie. But I can't deny that this is an absolutely masterfully made sequel. It's a great film. I can still prefer the original and still admit that this is a great movie. You know, why can't you have both?
You can't have both. And the thing is like, this movie goes back to the I mean, you know, I don't want to say Imagine Dragons because I don't really like Imagine Dragons, but my point is that when this movie came out, James Cameron at least nailed down one thing, and he took this thing and he built a world around what Ridley Scott started with, which was he
built about a whole world around a concept,
right? Ridley Scott took a concept that was like started and ended in a spaceship, and James Cameron like built a whole universe like around that thing, and it worked. Fuck you people that don't know this, but no, I mean, well, some of you are too young to appreciate this, but they made fucking toys out of this. They made like fucking like this thing was huge.
I had
this
some
thing
of them.
was a big deal, and it works. And a lot of the things, despite what you want to think, a lot of the things that you think you know about Alien or that you just take with a grain of salt or that you take as a given that are part of the Alien continuity, I think come from James Cameron's version more so than Ridley Scott's version.
The idea of the Queen, I mean, and like I said earlier, Ripley's entire backstory, like the whole universe, because like, I mean, Ridley Scott definitely created the foundation for that. I mean, you know, with the world, the type of universe that he built, this lived in dirty universe that didn't feel like sorry Todd, but doesn't feel like Star Trek, you know. It's very lived in.
Absolutely.
And that's a great building block. And Cameron isn't shitting on that movie. He's building upon what Scott did. If anything, this movie proves just how good of a foundation that Scott created with the first film.
He did exactly what you're supposed to do if you take something like this and you're an actual auteur filmmaker.
Make it your own.
Like, here's the thing. This person made these succinct like details about what is in this universe. I'm going to take the bare bones of that and do whatever I fucking want after. And James Cameron did that with this movie. And he did. He built upon it. And I still say, even to this day, things that people think about with the Alien franchise come from a lot of this movie. I mean, I don't know. It's disappointing to see so many people hating on it because, I mean, if gun to head, you made me pick a movie, I'm still going to pick Alien. Honestly, I'm still going to pick Alien, but this movie's a lot of fun to me.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I kind of jokingly said it was the Godfather 2 of genre movies, because Godfather 2 is one of the only sequels in history that could be in contention as being as good or close to as good as the original. I mean, there are exceptions. I think, people would say Empire Strikes Back, things like that. But for the most part,
there's a few like you can nail down, like it's Empire Strikes Back. I would say Terminator 2. Everybody says Terminator 2 is better, but fuck it. I like Terminator. But anyway.
But even if you say that Terminator 2 is better than Terminator, or that Terminator is better than Terminator 2, you still have to admit that Terminator 2 is still, as among sequels, a pretty damn good one. And in contention for that. Just like this is in contention for being one of the best sequels. I don't think it's as good as Scott's original, just because I prefer that type of movie to this type of movie.
Well, it proves James Cameron doesn't rest on just pre-established bullshit that works. Right. He wants to build on it. He's like, this was a good idea. Let's see how I can take this further.
And bring your own ideas into it. He turned Alien into a James Cameron movie. And that's what we want. I mean, sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. I personally have a soft spot for Alien Resurrection. I would never say that that's a great movie, but I like the audacity of getting Jean-Pierre Jeunet in there and making a fucking Jean-Pierre Jeunet movie grafted onto an Alien movie, because it's fascinating to me. It doesn't always work. It mostly doesn't work, but it's a fascinating watch, because I'd rather watch someone with a unique vision like that come in and work on a sequel than just some like journeyman director, or even oftentimes the original director who comes back and tries to do the same thing all over again. That's no fun to me. Even if it's a failure, it can be a fascinating failure. But Aliens is no failure. Aliens is a impeccably made film. One of the best movies of the 80s.
No, Aliens is one of the movies of the 80s that completely did the Batman thing, and it made a toy line. It made people today. I mean, you know more about the xenomorph than you ever thought you would because of aliens existing. yeah. And it's just that way. It's tough. I don't know. I mean, he said, I saw a quote with him. He said, what we did was you tried to deflect any possible criticism by making the film in our style, making it more thematically consistent with Terminator than with Alien. Like, he knew what he had, but he was still trying to do James Cameron on this thing. And that's what you should do if you're going to.
And if he had tried to do what Ridley Scott did, then people would just be shitting on him for copying Ridley Scott.
Right.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
I think that, so the Terminator kind of proved Cameron's resourcefulness and his ability to deliver a masterpiece on a small budget. But Aliens proves that he can work on a big budget, work within the studio, and still manage to have his vision mostly intact. It also proves that, sounds like hyperbole, but I think it also proves that he's one of the best directors of action that has ever lived. Because the way that he shoots the action in Aliens is pretty incredible. Once the shit hits the fan, which is about an hour into the movie, it does not let up until the final credits roll. Yeah. It moves on. I mean, it is relentlessly paced. That second half.
Something dire is happening in every minute after a certain point. Yeah.
But what really struck me this time when I watched it, because it's been a few years since I watched this, what really struck me this time is just how much buildup there is before any of that even happens. In the theatrical cut, it's a full hour into the film before we ever see a xenomorph. It's even longer in the director's cut, although you do see a face hugger earlier on in the director's cut. And luckily, he's filled the film with great, memorable characters. We've already talked about the great Marines, Bill Paxton, Ripley's surrogate daughter, Newt, Michael Biehn. Like, these are all characters you care about. You've got Paul Reiser's, company man, who's kind of a slime ball. Don't really care about him, but it still adds to the overall tapestry of what the film is.
He's a great character to hate.
He really is. Yeah.
Yeah,
he really is. And Cameron builds up this sense of impending dread throughout the movie. One thing I really like that he does is that the motion detector that they use, that like kind of clicking noise, beeping noise that it makes, it's like a ticking time bomb.
Yeah,
you know, and
one of the things that
it made me think of Dunkirk. Like the way that the music in that feels like a ticking time bomb. You're leading towards something and you're waiting for it to explode.
One of the things that never gets enough credit that I swear to God, for even since I was a kid, that I always think about, and maybe it's just me, but has always been that they had the robot turrets that could go out there and shoot the aliens. And it gives you like such a idea of how many there are and how fucked you are,
because you're seeing the ammo go down.
Yeah, and you see the ammo go down. I've never forgotten that from like when I was a little kid. I'm just like always like, oh, they find they have these things, and I'm like, that's so cool. Like you got the turrets, and then they're just like, okay, they keep shooting and they keep coming,
and then they're out of
like,
ammo.
We're just like, God damn it. Like it's just that they never stop.
Well, it was nice while it lasted.
And all of that does all of what that's doing is building towards this moment where all hell breaks loose. And when it does, like, it's palpable because you've been building up for an hour plus. And not only that, but you've been living with these characters that whole time. So you have kind of a sense of, like, you care if something happens to them.
There's also not enough respect given to the idea that Cameron built this whole other side of the aliens. As far as, I mean, if you connect it back to the Vietnam style thing, and I'm just saying, I mean, when you hear soldiers describe the situation, like they're going in all like armored to the gills and like ammoed out, but then these people just appear out of bushes, or they just show up. There's like aliens peeling off the walls.
I love that scene so much, when you first see that full xenomorph coming out of the wall.
It's just like fucked
time.
Up. You're not ready for that. You're not ready for like the stuff they have. And to think about that, I never thought about it till we were talking about it. Honestly, this time, that it really is that kind of a similar comparison in that these humans are fucking invading their territory now. You say what you will about imperialism or whatever. They're there. They took over. Like the colonists are there. The aliens won. The aliens, this is now their world. And now you're the invading force. Like you're trying to march in here and you're checking.
I mean, they are called the Colonial Marines.
Yeah.
And that was very purposeful.
Yeah. Like you're the force walking in, like you're owed something. Like they've already made a nesting ground. Like they've got the queen, they've got the shit. You're walking in on this. Like they're like, you don't belong here, motherfucker. Yeah. Like we've already set up. And so they have their own way of handling stuff. And it's that they know how to use their environment. They know how like things work. And so you're not prepared for what they do. I don't know. It's some fucking clever stuff that Cameron did here. And you're taking all that away with some of these stupid, shitty reviews, Letterboxd. So
it's not Letterboxd's fault. It's just the children.
No, I'm a patron of Letterboxd. I just hope the reviewers on Letterboxd are listening to me.
And you guys both grew up watching this movie?
Yeah, this was another Sunday afternoon.
Did you see this before the ever seen?
Yeah, I saw this one multiple times before I ever saw the first one. And I think just because, I mean, we talked a little bit about, folks making things strictly for a market, a target market, or, specifically to be marketed. But I think James Cameron does, I think his stuff is the best of both. It's artistically head and shoulders above everybody else. It's technically above everybody else. And I feel for these characters. And, even though, yes, this is technically chapter 2, like we get, quick flashes to kind of get caught up to speed.
Yeah, really there's enough information to where if you haven't seen the first one, you're not lost.
it's done in a smart way instead of like a scrolling paragraph of just which is just kind of lazy writing. But like
George Lucas, fuck you.
Yeah. But yeah, I really enjoy this. And I mean, I love the first one too. Gun to my head, I think nostalgia ends up tipping the scales a little bit for me personally, but you know, they're both so great. And yeah, I think part of the brilliance of this franchise is that they all do look different. So there's kind of,
it's fun,
something for everybody. And you know, it's okay. Gosh, you know, I've sat around and wasted many an hour wondering what Chris Cunningham Batman movie would look like. Hell, what a Michel Gondry Batman movie would look like.
Both of those would look fucking weird.
Yeah, but you know,
in very different ways.
Yeah, but how much fun! Like,
man, imagine Batman walks into an interrogation room and it's fucking Rubber Johnny sitting in there.
yeah.
The kids listening don't know who Rubber Johnny is, but look it up.
Yeah,
look it up. You'll have a nightmare.
It's tough because, like, I think the easy reason to hate James Cameron is because of the same shit that we try to give a bunch of people. Like, the tough part is that he knows. He's like, oh yeah, I know how to play every fucking pentatonic scale on the guitar, but I'm fucking write a Green Day banger right now. Like I can, because I know that's what y'all motherfuckers want to hear.
But I think that he genuinely has a love of genre. I really think he does. I don't think he's just, because I mean, we talked about him growing up, like his taste in comic books, his taste in movies. Like he loves action movies. He loves science fiction, probably more than any other genre. Like, this is his wheelhouse. He's just really good at it. And he's very technically good at it. So people, I think, because his movies, especially later on, have made so much money, and things like Avatar and Titanic especially were so ingrained in the cultural, like, conversation when they came out, that people got overexposed to James Cameron and now are retroactively going back and trying to shit on his stuff.
It's the same reason I've never seen this fucking Titanic movie. I got overexposed to Leo DiCaprio and I didn't give a shit. I didn't want to hear about him being the romantic leading dude. But James Cameron took he clearly, like, if you know anything about him, and hopefully if you're listening to this you learn something about him, he clearly fucking cares. Like, he is passionate about what
he cares enough to where he takes years and years in between movies to perfect the next thing that he's doing. You know, like, it's been 13 years since Avatar, and he's been working on a sequel because he cares enough to do that. Now,
and you're telling yourself, I don't give a shit about Avatar, but I feel the more we think about it, the more I'm like, God, he probably wouldn't be releasing it if it wasn't some cool shit.
He's put decades of his life into thinking about it. So you can't say that he doesn't care. Now going back to Alien. So one thing I do want to mention is that I think thematically the theatrical cut does suffer a little bit when it loses the subplot about Ripley losing her daughter, because when the battle between her and the alien queen, it's still very thrilling in the theatrical cut. Like I told you guys, I watched both versions of it this time, but it's so much more powerful, that final battle. In the director's cut, where those deleted scenes have been restored, they're also just really cool scenes. But in this version, in the director's cut version, Ripley and the queen, that battle becomes a battle between two mothers, each one trying to destroy the other because of the damage that they've done to their respective families. Because Ripley is mourning the loss of her daughter, which is solely, she didn't get a life with her daughter because of what the aliens, because of her experience with the aliens, right? Yeah. Because she had to go back into hypersleep. And then Ripley burns up all of those eggs, and you see the queen screaming. It's an incredible sequence, that confrontation between them. But that it becomes mom versus mom, this matriarchal battle, and that's a lot more thematically weighty, I think, than just kind of a revenge thing that it becomes.
I only watched it in the extended cut this time, and so I was even thinking, and I didn't go, cards on the table. I didn't watch the original cut or anything. So that is one thing that I was watching and being like, how could this movie work without that? That's part of the story.
I mean, it still works, but I think that it does have more weight in the director's cut because of that. And also I think the relationship between Ripley and Newt means a lot more.
They do seem to have some chemistry, and poor Newt. I can't believe Newt hasn't done more. Like I love Newt in this movie.
Yeah, I don't think that kid had any interest in acting beyond this.
No, she became like a school teacher. I looked her up, and like she, whatever. Like she was good in this movie.
Yeah, but I will say though, I do think that overall, I think that the theatrical cut is a little bit of a better cut. I think the pacing in the director's cut's a little bit off, whereas the theatrical cut moves at a more propulsive clip. It's a much quicker movie, and I think this is funny because this is actually something that I think that we'll see come up on other Cameron films because he's released a few theatrical cuts over the years, and I find like I know The Abyss has a really famous one, Terminator 2 has a really famous one. I find all of his director's cuts fascinating, and there are scenes that are very intriguing. Some of those scenes are even like almost integral, like the ones in Aliens, almost integral to the plot that they cut out, but I generally still enjoy the theatrical cuts better. I think that they're paced much better and they work just fine the way they are.
Yeah. I mean, looking back, I don't know that at any point I missed anything necessarily, but it does feel like I love the matriarchal, like that whole storyline with this one. I will say this. I mean, for Cameron, the easy part is that he seemed to care more about the aliens themselves, the xenomorphs, than he does about the humans. The part I love about Ridley Scott's Alien, if we have to compare the two, and we don't, but I'm doing it, is that one of the cool things about Alien is that there are actual humans. Like there are different variations of character in this thing, and so like it does seem like James Cameron's easily taken like the grunts, like these are the invading force, the grunts, the Marines, like whatever, there's Ripley and there's these guys. I could see that being a thing you could take apart with.
Sure, but I mean,
aliens.
I think he knew what he was doing and did that somewhat on purpose, though.
Yeah, and he tried. I mean, he tried to give them all each a personality, like you said, like in any good war movie. But there was something that felt a little different than like space truckers.
Sure, yeah,
like having their own personalities, their own lives, their own like world they lived in. So I still pick Alien over Aliens, but I don't think that James Cameron would have too much of a problem with that. I feel like
I think he would pick Alien over Aliens.
Yeah. I appreciate that he did what you should do with the sequel if you're going to do it, is like try to take like the core elements that made it successful and then build upon those, still try to make it your own. Don't fuck with like things that are gonna piss people off. Like don't make the xenomorph
don't
like
kill
Santa Claus.
Don't kill don't kill two of the main characters from the previous movie and before the credits roll on the new one.
That's a bad idea. That's a bad idea.
One thing I got to say, watching it this time, I thought, because I've never seen this on the big screen, and man, I bet Get Away From Her, You Bitch plays so great with a crowd.
Yeah,
it plays. I cheered from my couch by myself. And then when I watched it again, my wife had just gotten home. I was like, what? She's going to say it. Here it comes. Like it's such a great crowd pleasing line. I love it. It's so good.
I will say this. One of the quotes I saw from James Cameron that I loved is from an interview he did with the University Press of Mississippi. He said he knows this film has no, how do you put it here? No touch feel. It's all just sound and vision, he says. But everybody knows what it feels like to have water dripping on you. So if you can create a scene that's so quiet, You can project yourself into it and know what it would feel like to be standing where the actor is standing. That anything that happens to the character is in a way happening to you. Any way in which you can make a film more of a subjective experience for the audience member, the more impact it's going to have. And I think that's what people pay hard-earned dollars for when they go to see a film like this, to participate in it, to have their senses affected, to feel emotions. And so he's going for like Alien the Ride. Like he's and it goes back to the thing I said earlier that he told Sigourney Weaver. He's like, if the first one was the fun house, this is the roller coaster.
Yeah,
like, this is,
he knows what he's doing, knows what he's going for. So I do want to get into a little bit of our further viewing segment, as we always do towards the end of the episode. I'm curious what you guys would pair up with Aliens, other than Alien. What other movie would you throw in as a double feature with this one? I'll start with you, Todd.
Well, I really dig the soldiers dealing with something that they were clearly not trained for. I love that, because we get, for as much goofing around and everything that the Marines do here in Aliens, you do get a sense that like, oh, this is a tight group.
Yeah, they're well
trained. Yeah, they can probably handle this, especially if you're thinking about the crew from the Nostromo. Mm-hmm. They're miners, they're blue collar workers. So yeah, they didn't stand a chance.
These are Marines, not only just Marines, but they're on like the outer edge of the galaxy or whatever they're at, the solar system or whatever.
And just the disdain in the voice of like, is this another bug hunt? Which means like they've encountered alien lives before and dealt with them pretty easily. So it's like, okay, there's a good chance, like, we're gonna be okay. Like Hicks barely makes it out alive, and he's the only one.
And only because Sigourney saves his ass basically at the end.
Yeah.
That bug hunt line, by the way, is a blatant reference to Starship Troopers, the book. Because Cameron grew up reading that. So that's 100% what he's doing there.
So for my further viewing, I kind of, like I said, soldiers dealing with something that they clearly weren't ready for. I'm going to go Dog Soldiers.
That was one of my picks.
Yeah, I like it. And gosh, it's been a while since I've seen it, but whenever I think about werewolves or the soldiers, just trying to survive, I always come back to Dog Soldiers. It's really great. I think that's
a really great movie. That was the first one that came to my mind when I was trying to think of what I would do on this.
Yeah.
So that's a good pick. Gary?
I was gonna go. We've referenced it so many times. Starship Troopers would 100% be a double feature with this movie for me. I think that works. If I had to go out of my way, and it's not any personal bias aside, I would go like Pitch Black.
I knew exactly where you were going. Nice. I knew exactly where you were going, because that was all three of the ones you guys have just mentioned were on my list. So I love that. I love that.
I love some Vin Diesel. Has nothing to do with him, but he makes cinema perfection. Almost, this movie is almost on par with.
That movie would it's a very similar structure. Obviously very different characters and things, but
it's a movie. And I mean this unironically, completely. That could have, and it seems like steals directly from this movie, and it does take a lot of stuff from this movie, but I feel like it does do its own thing. But
you could say the same thing about Dog Soldiers. Dog Soldiers is 100% like riffing on the structure of something like Aliens.
Yeah.
And he's just turning it into a werewolf movie, which I guess that brings me to mind. So those were all on my list. One thing I was thinking about Dog Soldiers, though, is that, it's very similar to Aliens, except it doesn't have like this. It's all dudes, it doesn't have this like strong female character at the center. And that got me thinking about Neil Marshall's follow-up to the Dog Soldiers, which is The Descent, which is nothing but women. And obviously they're not soldiers in this situation. They are spelunkers, but they get caught in a situation where there is a indigenous species and they invade their space. and they get fucked up as a result.
Bro, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Seriously, that's a really good one. And they're like running into the aliens like caves, like they're caverns that they're wandering through in this movie. Totally makes sense. That's a great one. I wish I'd have thought of that one myself. And my wife hates that movie because she hates the claustrophobic feeling.
I was just about to say the claustrophobia alone is enough to freak you out.
Yeah. And no, that's a perfect one. No, I would 100% say The Descent would actually be dead on. That's the one that like modern take on this movie that nails it.
And it's but it's obviously much more horror than this, whereas this is more action oriented, but it still works. So when Aliens was released, Fox was not doing great. They desperately needed a hit. We joked early on in the episode how there had been a changing of the guard several times in the early to mid 80s at Fox because they kept hiring new studio heads in the hope that somebody would produce a hit. They were having trouble staying afloat, and Aliens may have single-handedly saved the studio. There are people who worked for Fox at the time who are quoted saying that like this movie kept Fox from going out of business. Like this movie saved Fox. So I mean, that alone is enough of an accolade, but it also did wonders for Weaver's career. She had been successful before this film. You know, she had already done Ghostbusters, but after this, she became a star. Like she is a movie star after Aliens. She also became the first actor to ever be nominated for an Oscar for a science fiction film, which was one of 7 Academy Award nominations that the film received that year. It won 2 of those. It won for sound design and for special effects, which also happened to be Stan Winston's first ever Oscar win. He had been nominated, we mentioned last week, on for Heart Beeps, but this is his first ever Oscar win, certainly not his last. The film proved that Cameron was not only talented, but could work within the confines of a Hollywood studio, even if he sometimes butted head with, you know, some of the suits. Although the film fell behind during the post-production schedule, it ended up being finished on time and almost on budget. At $18 million, it ended up being about $2 million over the original planned cost. So it kind of proved that he could deliver a movie on time, even if it was a photo finish to get it there.
I love talking about movies where we're just like, hey, you just went over by like $2 million.
Hey, and in movie terms, that's not too bad. But if the Terminator had guaranteed Cameron a spot at the Hollywood table, then Aliens put him pretty near the head of that table. And with his newfound power, he would actually, you know, just like after the Terminator, but even more so with Aliens, he had the ability to do whatever he wanted to do. And he would choose his next project. He would do a film that he had actually wanted to make ever since he was a teenager. This was an idea that he had had for decades. And that's the film we're going to be talking about on the next episode of Cinema Shock. We're going forward a couple years in time to James Cameron's The Abyss.
Piranha 3.
We're talking about The Abyss. Oh man, it's been years since I've seen it. It is, of all the James Cameron movies we're talking about, one of the hardest to find for some reason. It's hard to find streaming. It's never been released on Blu-ray. There has been a 4K restoration in the work for what seems like years at this point. But yeah, I don't know why this movie is so hard to find, but it is for such a big budget movie. But hopefully, I own it, so hopefully you guys can narrow it down. Otherwise, we might be having a movie night.
Hey,
sometime between fun. It's looking at Just Watch right now. It's streaming on Stars.
Okay.
and that's about it. So I guess you can do a
get
Stars
special
free
edition
trial
on Prime for like $12. So
like a digital?
No,
the DVD.
No, DVD.
Yeah, the DVD. Yeah,
you can get the VHS for $9.48.
Oh, I might buy that.
If you do the additional options like the used, you can do it for like less than 10. So
there you go. So it's out there. It's just, you just can't stream it. You're gonna have to, unless you have Stars, you're gonna have to find it. Hopefully down the line that won't be the case. So anyway, that's it for this episode. We'll be returning in a couple of weeks with our discussion on The Abyss. You guys follow along with us. You can stream the movie if you can find it. Maybe if you're listening to this episode a couple years down the line, it'll be more readily available. We'll see. Anyway, where can you guys be found on the internet for our listeners to follow you?
This is Gary Horne on all the social medias. Come follow me.
And if you like all of my nonsense about Star Trek, then you should definitely check out my show, Computer Resume Podcast, where we cover the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order. Available now wherever you get your podcasts, on all the social medias at Computer Resume. And you can find me at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond.
And I am at Justin_Bishop, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. You can also find the show at cinema_shock. That's on Twitter and Instagram. We're also on Facebook. We're also on Discord, which you can find a link to that on our website, cinemashock.net, which we just I relaunched, and I've got all the episodes up now. Everything's on there. I've still got some little goodies that I'm probably working on, but for the most part, everything you want is on there, including links to like every episode that we've ever done, and our merchandise that we're selling a Pride t-shirt right now through our Threadless, where 100% of the profits that we would normally make are going to the Trevor Project. So go check that out. We've sold a few of those already this month. So, but that's available year round. It's not just a Pride Month thing. We always keep that thing up there, so it's always available. It's our little Scully logo, but with the Pride flag behind it. It's very fun. But we've got also t-shirts with like all of our catchphrases with just the logo, whatever you want. It's all on there with all kinds of like color options and everything. So check that out if you want. We don't really make any money off of them. We just like the idea that people are fans of the show enough to wear a t-shirt. So you can also find us on all the regular podcatchers. Go rate and review if you're using, especially if you're using Apple Podcasts or Spotify, where you can rate and review now, or you can at least rate on Spotify now. And I guess most importantly, just share this with your friends. You know, if they're into movies, if they're into James Cameron or sci-fi or the Alien franchise or whatever, and you think they'd be interested, you know, send them a little DM, send them a text, and send them a link to this episode. I guess that's all I got, guys. That's all my bullshit. That's all the end of the episode bullshit.
Yeah, we rely on you guys. You got to tell people about us.
Word of mouth, man.
On you.
Yeah. I mean, we can do all the Google research and bullshit that we want, but word of mouth is what gets it out there, honestly. So please tell somebody. We would love that, and drop us a line on the social media. We're pretty good at
talk to us,
at interacting with folks. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun for us.
Tell us where you think we're wrong.
Yeah.
Tell Todd why he's so fucking stupid. I don't mean that, Todd. I love Todd. So
we love Todd. Everyone loves Todd. Todd's lovable. He's the most lovable person on this podcast, honestly.
That is 100% accurate.
Yeah. That's very sweet of you. That might be the sweetest
not without our editing, but yes.
Yeah, we have to edit some of his more
Todd would have been long
things,
ago canceled. It's not for us. But
we help
him. We help him, and he becomes the most popular.
We're chalking that up to naivety. So we're doing. Anyway, until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather,
and be excellent to each other.
He figured that if he could get us the keys back through quarantine, if one of us was impregnated and then frozen for the trip home, nobody would know about the keys we were carrying, me and Johnny. That's all I got, fellas.
I mean, I don't know what else you would have done, honestly.
Yeah, I know. I searched for a long time for a decent one. I was just like, I guess I'll go with the impregnated one, but yeah.
Do it. Impregnated with it.
Yeah. Absolutely.